Chapter 481, Return Boom. The instant Nathan's words faded, a deep rumble erupted from the hidden base. It sounded unmistakably like talismans detonating in succession. Without pausing to think, he dove into the pool, swam through the submerged tunnel, scaled the cliff's slick walls, and burst out into the open air. No sooner had he set foot on solid ground than the earth beneath him quivered. Ghost Realm Island seemed to shudder. A relentless volley of explosions echoed from below, each blast shaking the ground in a grim symphony of destruction. Nathan allowed himself a brief, satisfied smile. Before escaping the lab, he'd rigged it with delayed talismans, precisely timed to bring the entire structure down. His purpose was clear: utter annihilation of that underground stronghold. Though now officially a shinobi of Konoha, he refused to condone their most ruthless tactics. Using living subjects for cruel experiments wasn't merely ruthless, it was a monstrous betrayal of humanity. Steeling himself against the tremors, Nathan turned away from the crumbling mouth of the cave. Behind him, the base collapsed under the weight of its own horrors. Ahead lay the path back to Konoha, and the reckoning he intended to bring. Nathan paused at the edge of the jungle, staring down at the hidden research compound. In this world, human life was treated like dirt, but Nathan's convictions had carried over from his former life. He couldn't stand by while more innocents suffered. He took a steadying breath and signaled to his shadow clones. Under cover of darkness, the clones slipped through the perimeter, neutralizing patrols without a sound. Once the guards were subdued, Nathan slipped inside the main laboratory. Fluorescent lights flickered over rows of half-living test subjects, men and women broken by grotesque experiments. Their eyes flickered with a final spark of recognition as Nathan moved through the cells. He crouched beside the nearest subject, placed a hand over her heart, and whispered, "Rest easy." In an instant, her trembling ceased. One by one, Nathan ended their pain with swift mercy. The last cell contained only biochemical equipment. No living creature remained. Deep in the compound's inner sanctum, he confronted Dr. Kimura Kazuhiko. Kimura was huddled behind a reinforced console, frantic at the intrusion. "You, how dare you?" he stammered. Determination hardened Nathan's voice. "You won't hurt anyone else." With a single focused strike, Nathan unleashed a burst of energy that consumed Kimura's body in white-hot flame. When the light faded, only a pile of ash remained where the doctor had once stood. Nathan activated the demolition charges he'd planted earlier. Explosions rocked the compound, firestorms ripping through its steel girders. As the building collapsed, he and his shadow clones melted back into the forest, leaving nothing but ruin behind. Night settled again over the jungle. Nathan watched the last embers die, resolved that if this world valued life so little, he would stand up for it, even if he had to walk the path alone. Nathan hovered above the island, eyes scanning the terrain below. As the tremors within the earth finally waned, he shook his head in satisfaction and shot off into the night sky. More than 2 hours passed in that solitude. When dusk settled over the horizon, Nathan at last returned to the black stone base. He took a brief rest before hurrying to headquarters, where he reviewed the reconnaissance team's daytime report on Feiyu Town. No sooner had he absorbed their findings than he was on the move again, streaking toward the distant settlement. 15 minutes later, Nathan arrived over Feiyu Town. He circled high above the rooftops, eyes probing for any sign of troop movements. Concluding that the Mist Ninja showed no intention of deploying forces, he created a shadow clone and dispatched it to continue surveillance. His true form then surged away toward the familiar reef-lined beach where he trained. Night had fallen fully by the time he landed on the sand. Nathan swallowed several combat rations, allowing the nutrients to settle before standing motionless. With a deep breath, he summoned his shadow clone, but this time, before the first could even solidify, he split off another. 2 perfect doubles shimmered into existence at his command, ready to mirror his every move as Nathan prepared for the most demanding practice yet. Nathan instructed his shadow clone to study every book and scroll left behind by Kimura Kazuhiko, extracting as quickly as possible the techniques he'd need for the Byakugan transplant. Once the transplant succeeded, the Byakugan would compensate for his current blind spots in reconnaissance. Why not do this research in his original body? It was simple. Nathan's primary form was already committed to mastering two critical arts, the Palm Immortal technique and the Reflection Heart technique. The former accelerated the growth of his physique attribute, the latter fueled the evolution of his Sharingan. Both pursuits far outshone even the Byakugan in his priorities. While the Byakugan would certainly sharpen his sensory abilities, it couldn't match the long-term benefits of those two foundational techniques. Besides, studying scrolls and absorbing knowledge didn't require the full force of his true form. Letting a clone handle the legwork freed him to focus entirely on cultivation. With that settled, Nathan dismissed his clone and entered a deep meditative state, his mind drifting into the flow of chakra. Meanwhile, in Konoha, the root headquarters buzzed with its own clandestine activity. Danzo scanned the dossier in his hand, his gaunt features darkening even further. From his vantage point at the head of the chamber, he regarded the dozen or so root operatives kneeling before him and asked, voice low and unyielding, "What's happening on Ghost World Island?" Though he spoke calmly, an unmistakable chill laced his words. Even these indoctrinated shinobi, stripped of any personal will, shivered at the sound. One of them swallowed hard, forcing the trembling out of his throat, and reported, "My lord, the situation is still uncertain. Our only intelligence came from Snake Fang's summoned beast, a fox he personally transformed. According to that creature, the blood contract binding it to Snake Fang dissolved abruptly this afternoon, and it fears its master may be dead. It immediately relayed the news to us. As soon as we received the message, we tried to establish contact with Snake Fang's team, but all channels went silent." Danzo's pale eyes flicked down to the waiting shinobi. Snake Fang, Kimura Kazuhiko's codename within the root, was one of their most resourceful agents. If the worst had happened to him, the ramifications could be dire. Without another word, Danzo folded the report and slipped it into his sleeve, already devising his next move. Nathan had no idea that, before his death, Kimura Kazuhiko had quietly severed his contracts with the spiritual beasts. That one misstep was enough to tip off Root, though only slightly earlier than Nathan himself had anticipated, that communication with the Ghost Island base had gone dark. In the end, it hardly mattered. Nathan had already taken care of every loose end and had no fear of being discovered. Meanwhile, below him in Root's hidden chamber, Danzo's patience was wearing thin. He glared at his ninja operatives, unconvinced by their stammered explanations. Snorting coldly, he demanded, "What about Poison Wine and Red Snake Fang? They've lost contact, too. What are they up to?" One of the Root ninjas hesitated, swallowed, and then forced the words out. "Honorable Danzo, they've lost contact as well." A harsh chuckle escaped Danzo's lips instead of the fury they'd expected. He leaned back, steepling his fingers. After a moment, he murmured, "Excellent. Just as I hoped, someone has dared to set their sights on me. Truly, they're courting death." The ninja's eyes went wide. "My lord, what exactly do you mean?" Danzo cut him off with a disdainful snort, as if the answer were obvious. Danzo's gaze was cold as he addressed the Saile ant room. "It's no coincidence that we've heard nothing from Jiju and Chi. This has to be a deliberate act." He fixed the Root operative kneeling before him, code-named Feng, with a steely look. "Feng, mobilize our forces at once. I want every available agent scouring the Ghost World Island base. Find out exactly what's going on there." "Yes, Lord Danzo," Feng replied crisply, bowing before he slipped away. Left alone, Danzo leaned back in his chair, eyes half closed, as he contemplated the unfolding mystery. Unbeknownst to him, Nathan's recent, seemingly random maneuver had completely misled Danzo's suspicions. In truth, the base on Ghost World Island was so well hidden that only someone armed with future knowledge, or who had literally traveled through time, could have located it so quickly. Under ordinary circumstances, discovering its location would require months of painstaking reconnaissance. From Danzo's perspective, however, it made perfect sense to suspect an insider working against him. All Nathan could say was, "I wish him the best of luck." Chapter 482. 2 days later. In the blink of an eye, another 2 days had slipped by. It had now been 3 full days since the last raid by the Feiyu Genwu ninja, and so far there had been no new attacks. Nathan paced the room, frowning. "I wonder if anything will change today," he mused, recalling the Mist Ninja's odd behavior in Feiyu Town the night before. He was lost in thought when a sharp knock sounded at the door. His heart leapt. Could this be it? Nathan snatched up a towel, wiped the lingering dampness from his face, then steeled himself and opened the door. Standing there was a familiar figure, Nakagawa Ichiro, Chunin under Sano Nobuhisa. Nathan couldn't help but acknowledge Ichiro's remarkable luck. He had weathered several consecutive battles and still remained unscathed. Nathan's Sharingan flickered to life, sweeping Ichiro's form, and he detected a subtle uptick in the young shinobi's strength. "What brings you here, Ichiro?" Nathan asked, searching his comrade's eyes for signs of trouble. Nathan frowned as Nakagawa Ichiro lingered in the doorway, looking uneasy. At last, the younger shinobi cleared his throat and said, "Jonin Nathan, Captain Sano has called you to the conference room at once." Those words hit Nathan like déjà vu. The same summons had come just before the last Mist Shinobi assault. He sat up, eyebrows raised. "What's going on? Are the Mist Shinobi attacking again?" Ichiro nodded, glancing down the corridor to make sure they weren't overheard. "Yes, sir. This morning, you reported suspicious activity among the Mist Shinobi in Feiyu Town overnight. Captain Sano sent scouts at first light, and their report just came in. The Mist Shinobi are mobilizing for another strike." Nathan ran a hand through his hair, exhaling in frustration. "Understood. Go alert the others. Tell them to assemble in the hall. I'll be there shortly." "Right away, Jonin," Ichiro replied, bowing sharply before disappearing down the hall. Nathan paused in the doorway, watching the last figure vanish before turning back inside. He'd only just woken up, and his gear lay scattered on the bed, but even for a routine meeting, he preferred to be fully armed and ready. Given his current rank in the stronghold, there was at least a 90% chance Commander Sano Nobuhisa would send him out on reconnaissance immediately afterward. He had no intention of sprinting back later to gather his kit. Within minutes, he'd checked every strap and sealing every pouch. Satisfied, he locked his door and hurried down the corridor to the conference room. The meeting followed the familiar pattern: a briefing on the latest developments, a round of opinions from the captains, and then the allocation of new assignments. The only noteworthy update came from the forward reconnaissance team. The fog ninjas around Feiyu Town weren't concentrating their forces for a single decisive blow. Instead, they'd broken into small cells, probing and harassing the defenses, an obvious tactic designed to spread Nathan's forces thin and pick them off one patrol at a time. Nathan listened intently, already calculating how best to counter these scattered threats. With both armies evenly matched, the commanders saw no choice but to adopt mirror tactics. This would turn the conflict into a drawn-out war of attrition, swords and cannon fire echoing around the clock. Yet there was an upside. By refusing a direct assault on Blackstone Keep, the enemy had essentially conceded that target, freeing the defenders from any immediate threat to their fortress. Fighting on home soil also played to their strengths. Supply lines were shorter and more secure. Local ninjas knew every hidden path and vantage point, and morale ran high. All of these factors meant their troops could hold the field with greater ease, and that was the best news they could hope for. Once the strategy briefing ended, the officers relaxed for the first time in days. When it came to Nathan's turn, he received exactly what he'd expected, a simple surveillance assignment. All he needed to do was track the movements of the Mist Ninja and report back to headquarters. No frontline fighting, just observation and honest relaying of information. As the meeting broke up, Nathan slipped his notes into his pack and stepped out of the command hall into the crisp morning air. His watch had begun. Nathan didn't hesitate. He activated Wind Release, Wind Wings, spiraled upward, and headed straight for the Blackstone stronghold. According to the reconnaissance team's latest report, the Mist Village Shinobi weren't coming by sea this time. They'd all marched overland. Since Feiyu Town lay directly south of Blackstone Town, Nathan simply followed that bearing. A few minutes later, he arrived above the narrow valley where Sano Nobuhisa had once ambushed Yasuda Chuju and her squad. Dozens of Mist Shinobi were patrolling below, moving with exaggerated caution. Clearly, Sano's previous trap had left them on edge. Still, their wariness proved misplaced. In today's command meeting, Sano Nobuhisa had decided to shift the battlefield closer to the fortified walls of Blackstone, turning home field advantage against the invaders. The route from Feiyu to Blackstone was deliberately left unguarded. Time passed in tense silence. Then, at last, one of the mist squads spotted a fleeting ripple in the wind, Nathan's telltale trail. Nathan climbed too high into the sky, forcing his quarry to keep one eye on him, even as they pressed forward. But being spotted by Nathan was of no real concern. Both sides had been playing their cards in the open for some time. As long as no ambush was waiting, tracking the other party's movements was straightforward. After a few minutes of tailing them, Nathan grew restless. He descended out of sight and landed at a discreet distance. There, he formed a shadow clone using his shadow clone technique and dispatched it to carry on the reconnaissance while he turned his attention back to training. Over the next 2 days, Nathan poured himself into refining his Earth Escape hardening technique. His efforts paid off. The skill leaped from level 4 to level 5, marking a genuine turning point in its power. At level 5, he can now execute the technique almost instantly, fast enough for the most intense battles, and his personal safety has improved dramatically. But the next jump, from level 5 to level 6, demands 5,000 proficiency points. Even at Nathan's current rate of progress, earning that much experience will take well over a week, far longer than he would like. Nonetheless, he knows it's a necessary step if he hopes to stay ahead of whatever threats lie in wait. Nathan paused to weigh his options. He had 70,000 chakra points invested in the Earth-style, hardening technique, but he needed a stronger offensive skill. After some thought, he decided to siphon off 20,000 of those points and channel them into his fire-style, Suishin technique. That diversion would net him 200 proficiency points each day, enough to push Suishin to level 2 in 24 hours, and then to level 3 in just 5 more days. At level 3, Suishin would finally be reliable in light combat, rather than relegated to corpse disposal and cover-ups. Meanwhile, his water-style jutsu, water array wall, and water dragon bullet were both hanging at level 6, on the cusp of level 7. Reaching that cap would slash 40,000 chakra points from their energy costs whenever he used them. The only drawback was that Nathan had already exhausted his chakra allocations. There simply wasn't a spare pool to further refine Earth-style or Fire-style right now. Still, he wasn't out of options. Keeping his eyes trained on the distant Mist Ninja Squad, Nathan recognized the potential they offered. Strong opponents meant tougher fights, and tougher fights meant far more chakra-earned experience. In other words, the Mist team represented the perfect resource to speed up all his pending upgrades. With that in mind, he set off toward them, determined to put every last chakra point to good use. Chapter 483, Well Prepared. In what felt like the blink of an eye, nearly 2 hours had slipped by since the Mist Ninja of Feiyu Town reached the outskirts of Blackstone's stronghold. Almost before either side could catch its breath, combat erupted. Unlike the last skirmish, which had been confined to a handful of kilometers east of the fortress, this battle now spanned a circle over 10 kilometers in radius, encasing Blackstone to the southeast, southwest, northeast, and northwest. From high noon until the moon rose, the air never grew quiet. Exploding talismans shattered the sky with thunderous booms, while jagged bursts of ninjutsu crackled through the smoke. Within the stout walls of the stronghold, Konoha support units flitted in and out of the fray, some rushing fresh supplies to the front lines, others shepherding weary shinobi back to rest and recuperation. Home field advantage had never felt more decisive. Unlimited rations, well-stocked armories, and unbroken supply lines kept the defenders' spirits, and their chakra reserves, steadily rising. By contrast, the Mist contingent found its logistics fraying under constant harassment. Supply convoys were ambushed, medics ran low on chakra-restoring elixirs, and as the afternoon sun dipped toward dusk, fatigue and resource shortages began to exact their toll. Standing atop the rampart, Nathan scanned the battlefield with a keen eye. Smoke curled in every direction, and distant shouts told him how hard both sides were pushing. He turned to one of the supply officers at his side. "Send the medics forward with the next batch of chakra pills," he ordered firmly. "They'll need them. This fight's only just heating up." Below him, the clash raged on, and Nathan felt a surge of confidence. Here, on Konoha's home turf, they were more than ready. The Mist Ninja would soon discover just how well prepared the defenders of Blackstone really were. Chapter 1. The initiative lies with the leaf. The advantage in determining when and where to strike has always rested with Konohagakure. Whenever the front lines crept too close to Kirigakure's borders, the leaf simply fell back, thwarting any attempt by the Mist to draw them deeper into hostile territory. As a result, both sides have been reduced to a series of small-scale skirmishes. Operating in compact squads, each ninja leans on personal skill and battlefield savvy to make up for the lack of overwhelming force. Had they not done so, the Blood Mist's losses would have been far heavier. In truth, the Mist's graduates are elite, arguably superior fighters on average to their Leaf counterparts. Yet even against such formidable individuals, Konoha's unflagging supply lines and reinforcements have kept the casualty toll almost even. Night had fallen over Blackstone's stronghold. In the dimly lit conference room, Nathan flipped through the latest battle report, his face impassive. Around the long table, his fellow generation, the rank-and-file genin, mirrored his silence. This was not indifference. It was exhaustion. 2 years of endless war had taught them that life and death could turn on a single shinobi's misstep. They had learned to steel their nerves against grief and fear. After all, they were only genin. If they fell in battle, so be it. Nathan set the report down with a soft thud. The numbers on the page, shinobi lost, missions failed, skirmishes won, meant little when every name represented someone's friend, someone's student, someone's comrade. He rose and cleared his throat. It was time to plan the next move. In this war of attrition, the slightest advantage could tip the scales, and the leaf would not wait to be provoked. Nathan sat at the head of the conference table, the dim lantern light casting long shadows across the floor. Around him, the village's tactical officers flipped through thick reports, the shuffling of paper the only sound in the hushed chamber. At this rate, Nathan began, leaning forward, full recovery from the war will take years. But there's no need to panic. Today's losses came almost entirely from our Cho, Unin and Jinin ranks. That's the difference between a hit-and-run skirmish and an outright melee. He tapped a chart showing casualty figures. In a large-scale engagement, even Jonin can't withdraw freely without orders from high command, so they have to risk everything. In squad-level operations, though, each team has the autonomy to pull back if the tide turns. As long as Kirigakure doesn't lay siege or bring overwhelming force, those small fights pose far less threat to life. He let the point hang in the air. By sunset, only a handful of Jonin had fallen, and those were the specialized instructors whose skills were already waning. We can expect their Jonin casualties to remain steady, provided they don't force us into a decisive battle. Silence settled over the room once more, punctuated only by the crisp turning of pages and the low hum of the brazier. After several breaths, Sano Nobuhisa cleared his throat, drawing everyone's full attention. Nathan watched as Sano Nobuhisa scanned the assembled shinobi, his brow heavy with concern. "You've all seen today's battle report," he began. "The results aren't bad, but our losses were far from negligible." A tense silence followed as everyone waited for him to continue. Finally, Sano's voice cut through the quiet. "I'm proposing we reduce the size of tomorrow's battlefield." A ripple of agreement spread through the teams. Shrinking the engagement zone would bring the front lines closer to their stronghold, speeding up supply runs and medical evacuations, critical when every second counts. Faster rescues and more efficient logistics could substantially lower the middle genin casualty rate. But the Junin exchanged uneasy glances. A smaller battlefield also meant the enemy would be more concentrated. The odds of crossing paths with opposing Junin would rise, and if they found themselves outmatched, retreating safely would become far more dangerous. Nonetheless, the potential for saving lives on the lower ranks made it a proposal they couldn't ignore. Despite the inherent risks, the plan remained acceptable, and after a brief discussion, everyone nodded in agreement. Sano Nobuhisa let out a relieved breath. Though he was a talented commander with a civilian background, his authority within the Blackstone stronghold was limited. That was why he always convened these meetings, to ensure that every faction's interests were weighed and balanced. This time, none of the Jonin present had objected to his proposal. In his mind, that was a victory. it meant the middle-ranking genin would have a better chance of survival. Once the council's business was settled, Sano turned his attention to organizing the night watch and assigning tomorrow's defensive sectors. The meeting dragged on for another hour before it finally adjourned. As Nathan rose to leave the conference room, Sano called out, "Joan and Nathan, please wait." Nathan paused at the threshold, glanced back, and offered a questioning look. "Yes, Captain Sano?" Sano didn't waste a moment. "There's one more thing I need you to handle." He leaned forward, voice low but firm, and began to lay out the additional orders. After today's battle, the fortress was overflowing with wounded shinobi, and the medical corps simply couldn't keep up. Commander Genma approached Nathan. "We need you to help with the triage. Can you spare some time and chakra?" Nathan's brow furrowed. Thanks to the reinforcement of Mist Nin on the front lines, his chakra reserves were comfortably full for the moment, but every last drop mattered. He had already allocated it according to a precise schedule, and diverting any now threatened to upset his carefully laid plans. Still, he paused to weigh the offer. He wasn't about to let himself be strong-armed by sentiment, but he knew he would soon have to perform a delicate self-operation, transplanting the white eye. He would need absolute mastery over his chakra control, down to the finest medical seals. Treating battlefield injuries under real conditions would be invaluable practice, and it would improve his chances of success when the time came for his own surgery. With a steady exhale, Nathan nodded. "All right, show me where they are." It wasn't an experiment on living subjects. He wouldn't do to them what he wouldn't do to himself, but a genuine chance to refine the very skills he was about to test on his own body. He sheathed his weapons, closed the distance to a shattered bunker door, and prepared to heal. Nathan couldn't stand by and watch Kimura Kazuhiko and the others repeat the same reckless mistakes, especially when he refused to be held to a different standard. Instead, he saw a chance to turn the situation to his advantage. By treating the team's injuries, he could observe firsthand how their bodies responded to various medical ninjutsu techniques, and, in the process, deepen his own understanding. Every procedure he performed sharpened his skills, even if it wasn't enough to vault him into a whole new tier of mastery. After all, each incremental gain brought fresh insight, and when he eventually needed to heal himself, the more proficient he was, the better the results would be. After some thought, Nathan accepted Sano Nobuhisa's request without hesitation. The gratitude in Sano's eyes, confirmed by the relieved smile that spread across his face, told him that the request had been genuine. With a polite bow, Nathan bid farewell and headed straight for the hospital. Over the next few days, his schedule was relentless. By daylight, he sparred and honed his fighting techniques. By night, he administered bandages, performed chakra-infused sutures, and monitored each patient's recovery. It wasn't a life of leisure, but it was fulfilling. To maximize his study time, he dispatched a shadow clone to stand watch in the infirmary, while the real Nathan pored over the volumes and scrolls left behind by Kimura Kazuhiko, analyzing every wrinkle of text from dusk until dawn. In those quiet hours, every discovery brought him one step closer to true mastery. After months of rigorous research, Nathan fused his medical ninjutsu expertise with advanced body modification techniques to develop a way to augment the human frame, specifically by integrating an additional visual system. By focusing solely on ocular enhancement and leaving every other physiological function untouched, he paved the way for his white eye transplant procedure. Chapter 484, The Transformation Begins. A week had passed. After 7 relentless days of combat, both Konoha and Kirigakure were utterly spent. Unwilling to bleed for a stalemate, the two sides quietly agreed on a temporary ceasefire. Stepping out of the War Council's chamber, Nathan surveyed the deserted fortress. Corridors that had throbbed with battle cries now lay silent, walls scarred by countless clashes. He murmured to himself, the closer this war gets to its end, the more sorrow it leaves in its wake. Nathan wasn't a deity, but 2 months on the front lines had taught him the same lesson. The Third Great Ninja War was drawing to a close, and its carnage was escalating. In this stronghold alone, 2/3 of the defenders had been put out of action in the space of a week. Had it not been for medical ninjutsu, half of those injured would have perished. Even so, losing nearly one-third of the garrison in just 7 days was a devastating blow, and all of it happened despite successfully repelling Kirigakure's feint attack. Nathan could only imagine how fierce the fighting would be once the enemy struck the breach in the southern defenses. He was certain people were dying by the dozens, if not more. He shook his head to dispel such dark thoughts. His power was still far from invincible. For now, he had no choice but to endure. Perhaps one day, once he'd mastered this planet, he could reshape it to his will. Though he wondered if he'd ever have the luxury of time. Lost in reflection, Nathan returned to his quarters. He sat on the edge of his bed, closed his eyes, and methodically reviewed the visual system augmentation techniques he'd been refining. An hour slipped by. When he opened his eyes again, he sprang into action, packing his gear swiftly and silently. Without a word, he slipped out the door, flew low, and carefully evaded Konoha's patrols. In minutes, he had left the stronghold behind, disappearing into the night. Nathan slipped away under the fading light, weaving between the mist ninja patrols that still lingered outside Blackstone Fortress. Though a temporary truce held, the mist ninjas had not withdrawn. They remained poised beyond the walls, ready to strike at any moment. Nathan's purpose, however, was not to provoke them. He needed a secluded spot to undergo the ocular reconstruction surgery, and today's lull in the fighting offered the perfect window. After half an hour of cautious trekking, he finally left the battlefield behind. Without hesitation, Nathan unleashed his technique, wind escape, gale wings, and shot off toward the heartland of the Fire Kingdom at a blistering 100 meters per second. The reconstruction wouldn't take long, but it demanded utmost discretion. For now, the Fire Kingdom was the safest refuge he could find. Propelled by the rushing wind, Nathan pressed onward, time flowing past him like water. Nathan trudged on until, just before noon, he stumbled upon what he'd been looking for, a deserted cave mouth hidden among the trees. From the outside, it looked like nothing more than an ordinary hollow, but when he ventured inside, he realized there was far more to it than met the eye. He entered a vast, vaulted chamber. Sunlight drifting through cracks in the rock fell across broken wooden doors and splintered crates. A slow grin spread across Nathan's face. This wasn't a natural grotto at all, but a man-made underground complex, undoubtedly a long-abandoned supply depot. Decaying crates and rotted barrels in the adjoining rooms told him this storehouse had once held war material, stocked by some force preparing for battle. Judging by the level of rot, the place had been untouched for decades, certainly well before the founding of Konoha. That explained why it had remained hidden so long. No one alive remembered its passageways. Nathan owed his discovery to the giant bear that had taken refuge here. Had he not tracked the animal's scent to its lair, he'd never have known this secret depot even existed. Now that he had, it would take an extraordinary effort for anyone else to find, and that made it the perfect hideout. Nathan surveyed the underground chamber and smiled. Not only would it serve perfectly for the operation ahead, but it could also become his secret base once everything was in place, 2 goals with 1 effort. "This is perfect," he murmured, then set to work. He strode to a far corner of the hall, raised his hand in a tight seal, and channeled chakra to unleash his ninjutsu. Wind release. Great breakthrough. Nathan exhaled, and a powerful gust roared from his lips, sweeping through the entire space. Dust, debris, and discarded rubbish billowed toward the exit in a rolling whirlwind. With every passing second, the underground hall grew cleaner, until finally the wind died away and Nathan lowered his hand. He inspected the now pristine floor and nodded with satisfaction. But when he glanced into the adjoining rooms, his brow furrowed. The force of the wind had driven the filth inward, leaving those smaller chambers in worse disarray. Still, he barely noticed. Right now, he had more pressing matters to attend to. This hall was ready for surgery, and for Nathan, that was all that mattered. Nathan surveyed the empty underground chamber and confirmed it was clear. Spotting no table or seating, he pressed his foot to the stone floor, channeling earth-release chakra into the rock itself. Before him, a sturdy operating table hewn from stone slid upward, no ninjutsu involved, just Nathan's precise use of earth chakra to reshape the ground. He then wove his hands into the requisite seals for the shadow clone technique. A swirl of black chakra smoke filled the air, and two perfect copies of Nathan stood before him. "First," he said to one clone, "you'll stay here and stand guard." "Understood," the clone replied without hesitation, then strode from the chamber's entrance to take up its post. Nathan turned to the second clone and held out two scrolls. "You handle the operation. Take these." The second clone nodded crisply, accepted the scrolls, and formed its own hand seals. It unfurled the first scroll to reveal a complete set of surgical instruments, scalpels, forceps, clamps, each strapped neatly to a leather frame. Then it moved on to the second scroll, preparing whatever medical techniques or instructions Nathan had entrusted to it. The chamber fell silent, save for the faint rustle of parchment as the clone readied the tools for the procedure ahead. Suddenly a small vial appeared at the center of the unrolled scroll, its pale green liquid rippling in the torchlight. Floating within the solution was a single, vibrant eye, the white eye Nathan had seized from Ching. Now, his shadow clone would graft it into his own body, giving him mastery over its power through an entirely new visual system. Nathan climbed onto the smooth stone slab and lay perfectly still. His clone moved with surgical precision, arranging scalpel, forceps, and glowing elixirs in neat, ritualistic order. A hush fell over the chamber as the last preparations were made. Then, without a word, the clone drew a slender blade and the transplant began. Chapter 485. "Ready? I'm about to begin," the shadow clone said, its voice calm as it stared down at Nathan, who lay strapped to the cold stone operating table. Nathan gave a brief nod. Swiveling his head to the side, he swallowed a handful of pills in one gulp. On paper, they were painkillers, but in truth they were a potent toxin he'd engineered himself, designed to suppress his extraordinary self-healing. With his physique attribute now at 19, Nathan's regenerative powers far outstripped any normal humans. Under ordinary circumstances, that would be a blessing. Today, it posed a serious obstacle. If his wounds began to seal mid-operation, they'd have to start all over. He owed the formula to the ancient scrolls left behind by Kimura Kazuhiko. Without those pharmacological texts, he never could have reverse-engineered a drug so precisely targeted. Of course, any concoction brewed in such haste carried imperfections, and he braced himself for the side effects that would follow. The clone flexed its fingers around a gleaming scalpel. "Here we go," it said, voice steady. Nathan closed his eyes, drew a deep breath, and whispered, "Do it." The blade descended. Nathan possessed the rare ocular technique called Heaven's Control, which granted him the power to surgically remove any drug's side effects at will. This was the technique's second tier, the ability to pinpoint and excise specific negative conditions, effectively rolling back the body like a system restore. Even slow-acting toxins held no terror for him. Yet as his life force began to drain away, Nathan's face went pale. He drew a steadying breath, then looked to his shadow clone and gave a single nod. "Let's begin." "Understood." Without hesitation, the clone formed a hand seal and invoked the chakra scalpel. A soft green light shimmered around his right hand. Nathan watched, grim but determined, as the blade severed a cluster of his pain nerves. It wasn't enough merely to suppress his body's self-healing. He had to dull the agony itself. Scraping bone to purge the poison would demand every ounce of courage he could muster. This was only the first step. Attempts to numb him with anesthesia, or even knock him out, were out of the question. Any sedative risked disrupting the shadow clone's formation, and the transformation process demanded Nathan remain fully conscious and coordinated. The simplest solution was to sever his pain nerves directly. With a swift, practiced motion, the clone brought a set of blades to Nathan's face. Swipe, swipe. Each cut lanced through tissue, systematically disabling the pain fibers from his jawline to his brow. As the last nerve fibers surrendered, Nathan's features slackened into a strangely blank expression. He couldn't feel a thing. Unfazed, the clone pressed on, slicing away every remaining pain route from neck to forehead. Next came a scalpel. In one deliberate incision, the clone opened the flesh between Nathan's eyebrows, peeling back a generous flap of skin and muscle. The sight was grotesque, made all the more horrifying by Nathan's wide-open eyes, tracking every precise movement. The clone swapped to an even finer blade, gliding along the muscle fibers until the hard curve of his skull came into contact with steel. Nathan's face lay numb and exposed, but he neither flinched nor closed his eyes. The procedure had only just begun. Nathan's shadow clone suddenly infused the scalpel with a whisper of wind-release chakra, instantly sharpening its blade. With one fluid stroke, the clone sliced through the thick frontal bone, exposing the brain beneath. Even though the local sensory nerves had been severed, Nathan still flinched at the agony. His honed mental awareness would not let him ignore it. But 2 years of life-and-death struggle had steeled him. He clenched his jaw and endured. The clone's face remained impassive as he worked on. Gently parting the diencephalon from the midbrain, he revealed the third ventricle in all its hollow depth. At its apex lay a small, gray-red ellipsoid about 7 millimeters long, and 4 millimeters wide, the elusive pineal gland. This tiny organ was the keystone of Nathan's visual system augmentation, the centerpiece of his plan to graft an auxiliary white eye. He had chosen this precise spot so he could transplant the new eye directly into the center of his brow, where it would be perfectly positioned. Nathan focused on the pineal gland's unique structure, a dense web of nerves and blood vessels just waiting to be coaxed into forming an extra optic nerve. Channeling his chakra, his shadow clone raised its hand into a seal and invoked the palm immortal technique. A globe of yang escape chakra shimmered into being, precisely directed toward the gland's hidden vitality. At that instant, Nathan's Mangekyo Sharingan snapped open. Crimson tears streamed from his right eye as the legendary power of man's control flared to life. An unseen force rippled through him, bending the gland's evolution to his will. Man's control is, at its core, self-mastery, the ability to govern every facet of one's own body. Anything Nathan defined as self could be altered by this power. In the earliest days after awakening the Mangekyo Sharingan, that influence barely reached beyond an organ level, tweaking his heartbeat or sharpening his digestion at best. But today, with the palm immortal technique amplifying his chakra, Nathan was on the verge of pushing his pineal gland into uncharted territory. And with it, he would unlock an entirely new realm of perception. With each evolution of his Mangekyo Sharingan, its influence deepened, down to the tiniest cellular level. That's why Nathan had begun using it to accelerate his body's own evolution. Now he could actively catalyze the differentiation and growth of his nervous system. He assigned the human control technique to guide the developmental direction, while his shadow clone poured in the vital energy needed for true physiological change. Together, they worked in concert to forge a complete second visual apparatus. To prevent overtaxing his ocular powers, and to give the Mangekyo Sharingan short rests, Nathan paused at intervals, letting the shadow clone inspect the budding optic fibers for any flaws. He also performed delicate microsurgery to connect these new neural pathways to specific regions of his brain, ensuring seamless integration with his existing senses. Minute by minute, the procedure progressed. After a full hour, the final nerve fibers settled into place and the catalysis was complete. Nathan closed his eyes, relinquishing the Mangekyo Sharingan's strain, then opened them again to survey his surroundings. Almost instantly, a shroud seemed to fall over his vision, as if a thin, misty veil had settled between him and the world, blurring every shape and color beyond recognition. Nathan blinked as his vision blurred. He'd clearly pushed his eyes to their limit. His expression flickered for a moment, then settled back into its usual calm. The extensive use of human control had taken a toll, but he considered the cost well worth it. In less than a year, his Mangekyo Sharingan would finally evolve into the eternal Mangekyo Sharingan, and his sight would be fully restored. The advantages he'd gained so far outweighed this temporary impairment. Most people who attempt to transform their bodies risk destabilizing their physiology and enduring lasting side effects. Nathan's experience was different. This was less a forced transformation and more a true evolution, an organic refinement of his own flesh and blood. Like turning raw ingredients into a fine meal, he'd guided and accelerated the process with his chakra. Though he might endure some initial discomfort, over time his body would adapt, growing stronger and more resilient. Eventually, after several cycles of human control and natural evolution, this new form would be as intrinsic to him as breathing itself. Nathan saw promise in this method, perhaps it would awaken an additional bloodline within him. True bloodline inheritance is written into one's DNA. Grafting foreign organs cannot confer that heritage. Kakashi discovered this the hard way. Although he wielded the Sharingan, he never genuinely possessed Uchiha lineage and struggled to master the eye. Nathan's case, however, was different. He already carried Uchiha genes, and since both the Uchiha and Hyuga clans trace back to the ancient Otsutsuki, dormant Hyuga DNA might lie in his blood. By fusing the Byakugan into his chakra network, he could potentially activate those hidden genes and claim the Hyuga bloodline. If successful, commanding the Byakugan would likely be far less grueling for him than the Sharingan was for Kakashi. Of course, Nathan also understood that while bloodline abilities could rapidly accelerate his strength, they inevitably became a hindrance to further advancement at higher levels. Nathan had made up his mind. He wouldn't waste his time chasing the fabled Otsutsuki bloodline. Instead, he'd break free of their shackles and carve out his own path. That was the only way he could truly shape his future. Lost in his thoughts, Nathan almost didn't notice that his shadow clone had just finished its final diagnostics and was now poised to receive the transplanted white eye. At this point, the procedure was virtually guaranteed to succeed. A moment later, a notification pinged in his mind. Reward from reader Hatiandi, 1,000 starter coins. Nathan allowed himself a small smile. With this boost, his journey was off to a solid start. Chapter 486, Filling in the Gaps. As Nathan had anticipated, the rest of the operation went off without a hitch. The white eye transplant was completed flawlessly, and half an hour later, he found himself sitting up on the cold stone table. Gingerly, he pressed his fingers to his forehead where the new eye now rested. It looked as though it had been part of him from birth. No scars, no swelling, nothing to betray the incredible procedure. All credit went to the potency of his palm fairy technique, a skill so refined it could weave flesh and spirit together seamlessly. Still, despite the perfect outward appearance, Nathan felt a subtle discord beneath his skin. He shut his eyes, steeling himself against the sharp sting in his sockets, and activated his Manjikyo Sharingan. With that power awakened, he unleashed the Tianjiyu, divine gaze of heaven, from his left eye. Instantly, an unseen force drew him out of the physical realm into a silent, weightless void. There, he deliberately purged the residual side effects of the surgical inhibitor. After only a few breaths, Nathan remanifested on the operating table. He immediately sensed his body's self-healing energies flowing, mending tissue, settling imbalances, knitting everything back into perfect harmony. Within moments, the last trace of internal disharmony had vanished. Nathan opened his eyes, his new white eye shimmering as naturally as the one beside it, and rose with the quiet confidence of a man whose every hidden gap had just been filled. This is the fundamental difference between medical ninjutsu and true self-healing. No matter how advanced medical ninjutsu becomes, it still relies on external techniques. Only the body's own natural evolution can perfectly adapt to itself. Nathan waited patiently until the last tremor of discomfort in his new eye subsided. Now came the real test. Could he actually use it? If he couldn't, even the most flawless transplant would be worthless. A surge of relief washed over him when he realized this eye wasn't like Kakashi's. He could close the lid at will. The previous owner must have installed an external seal, both to protect the graft and to suppress the Byakugan's chakra drain. And it seemed they applied the same consideration for Nathan's benefit. When dormant, the eye required no more chakra than a normal one. Inhale, exhale. Steadying his breath, Nathan let his mind clear. He raised a hand, channeled chakra through his arm, and activated the Byakugan located between his brows. Instantly, his vision sharpened, the world around him unfolding in intricate detail. His new eye was alive, and it was working. Nathan closed his eyes and summoned a strange, all-encompassing vision. In an instant, the walls of the chamber, the ceiling of rock, even his own body dissolved from his awareness. His sight pierced the darkness, guided only by his will, honing in on a single point beyond the cave mouth. There, framed against the moonlit sky, perched his shadow clone on the gnarled branch of an ancient oak. The duplicate stood motionless, scanning the surroundings with taut vigilance. Nathan let his gaze linger, until inexplicably, the clone stiffened and swept his eyes across the landscape, finding nothing. Just as the double began to lean forward, ready to descend for a closer look, Nathan's voice echoed in his mind. "Relax. It's me." Instantly, the clone's tension drained away, and he let out a silent sigh of relief. Back in the underground hall, Nathan lay tethered to the operating table, the heart-to-heart technique anchoring his consciousness to the new power he was testing, the Byakugan. He maintained the link minute after minute as the world around him slipped further into shadow. After nearly 30 seconds, a dull ache crept behind his eyes. Petals of pain gently reminded him he was still human. With a slow, deliberate breath, Nathan withdrew the technique. His vision snapped back to normal, and the Byakugan's pale glow faded. He had done it. The legendary eye now lay fully awakened within him, capable of perceiving any motion or hidden presence within a 1-kilometer radius. A triumphant thrill pulsed through Nathan's chest. The real test, he knew, was only just beginning. Not only did Nathan's transplanted Byakugan lack the Hyuga branch's usual caged bird seal, it also did away with that infamous 1-degree blind spot behind the first thoracic vertebra. In terms of pure vision, it was virtually flawless. Its only real drawback was chakra consumption. It drained far more than he'd anticipated, a clear sign it wasn't in its original host. On top of that, he couldn't keep it activated for long. Whether the transplant simply hadn't been broken in yet or some other factor was at play, he found he could only sustain the Byakugan for under a minute before his eyes began to burn and his mind clouded. Beyond that point, he had to shut it off and rest, or risk blackout. These were technical glitches he was determined to fix, and in any case, first tries often go awry. He just wasn't sure he'd ever get a second shot at perfecting it. Shaking off the worry, Nathan refocused his attention and opened the proficiency panel. A light blue status panel suddenly appeared before Nathan. He scanned the readouts at once. Name, Uchiha. Nathan, age 12, constitution, 19, spirit, chakra, 21,600, 190,172, 170, 364. Bloodline sharing on Manjikyo, 12,808 and 50,000, 14,416, 50,000. Byakugan, unawakened, 15,100. Skills, chakra refining technique, level 5, 2,630, 5,000, 2,086, 5,000. Wind style, Rasen Shuriken, 5,920,000, 8,220,000. Wind style, Wind wings, 1/5, 1/5,000, 2,355,000. Fire style, Great Dragon Fire Technique, for 5, 425,000. Fire style, Unglazed Technique, 725,000. Water style, Big Shark Bullet, 6, 3,205,000, 1,580, 10,000. Earth style, Hardening Technique, MEV 5, 3,500, 5,000. Earth style, Earth Flow Wall 1, 21,200. Earth style, Earth Spear 1, 18,200. Shadow Clone Technique 5, 1,025, 5,000, 3,100, 5,000. Chuck Pull Absorption Technique 6, 820, 10,000, 3,500, 10,000. Rasengan 7, 7,820,000, 12,120, 20,000. Heart Opening Technique 2,500, 1,304, 2,000. Palm Immortal Technique over 8, 28,500, 50,000, 37,400, 50,000. Check Carrot Scalpel 6, 4,500, 10,000, 8,500, 10,000. Skin Extraction Technique, Love 6, 110,000, 2,700, 10,000. Heart Reflection Technique, Level 8, 15,299, 50,000, 18,371, 50,000. Chakra Control, Level 6, 4,550, 5,000, 750, 10,000. Guardian Seal 2, 250, 500. Sealing Array 2, 240, 500. Perfect Skills. Instant Sword Technique, Water 7, Water Style. Water Array Wall 7. Water Style, Water Dragon Bullet. Nathan's gaze zeroed in on the Byakugan Unawakened 15,100 entry. His heart beat faster at the thought of unlocking that elusive bloodline potential. Nathan couldn't deny that his plan had succeeded. He'd expected this outcome, but seeing the transplanted Byakugan actually awakening his bloodline abilities still sent a thrill through him. Now, Just like the Sharingan, he could train and improve this new dojutsu. In the Shinobi world, the Byakugan was often underrated. Its raw performance looked average, but its true potential was immense. Born of the Otsutsuki clan, it could unlock a suite of powerful abilities once it evolved. Nathan had no desire for flashy or exotic powers. He simply wanted to sharpen its core strengths, telescopic and penetrating vision. At the moment, his Byakugan could peer only a kilometer away, and even that range was compromised in areas thick with chakra interference. But if he could push it further, seeing clearly through solid barriers, doubling or tripling its reach to 2 or 3 kilometers, his reconnaissance skills would become nearly unrivaled. That alone would offset every current limitation of the unrefined Byakugan. With the proficiency panel and the human control system in place, if Nathan still can't break free from his bloodline's limitations, transcendence is out of reach. His real challenge lies in awakening his inherited power and in finding a way to advance the Byakugan's evolution. After all, the reflection of the heart technique was painstakingly developed by the Uchiha ancestors for the Sharingan alone. Even though Nathan has reshaped it beyond recognition, it still has no effect on the Byakugan. If he truly wants to evolve his dojutsu, he must devise an entirely new method. Chapter 487. Leaving Nathan sat in silent concentration, then suddenly activated his Mangekyo Sharingan once more. Blood and tears welled from his right eye as he summoned the jutsu, human control. An unseen force enveloped him, guiding the dormant Byakugan at the center of his forehead to merge with his own chakra. 1 second, 2, 3, time stretched on. After more than 20 seconds, Nathan released the technique and opened his eyes. He glanced at the progress monitor floating before him. The Byakugan's awakening level stubbornly remained at 15%. His jaw clenched, but he refused to be discouraged. After a brief breather, Nathan willed his power back into motion, reactivating human control to push the fusion further. Again, 20 seconds passed before the intense strain forced him to cut the jutsu. He checked the monitor. Still 15%. Nathan frowned, tension knotting his brow. He let his vision rest for a moment, feeling a gentle warmth spread through his eyes. Though the indicator hadn't budged, he was more determined than ever to unlock the Byakugan's true potential and to leave this place stronger than before. Nathan steadied his breath and activated human defense once more, channeling the latent Byakugan into his very veins. Over and over he repeated the process, 5 times in total, each strike pushed to its absolute limit. 5 minutes later, he glanced up at the status panel. The Byakugan's awakening gauge had inched forward, from 1500 to 1600. A small, satisfied grin tugged at his lips. Exactly as he'd predicted, human defense proved capable of accelerating the Byakugan's emergence. Now he had a reliable strategy. According to his earlier tests, he would need roughly 425 full power casts of human defense to bring the Byakugan to full bloom. True, as his Mangekyo Sharingan matured, each activation would grow stronger and last longer. But none of that changed the fundamental truth. He would still have to invoke his Mangekyo pupil technique hundreds of times. Too much use of the Mangekyo Sharingan risked irreversible damage, eventual blindness. Nathan had no intention of sacrificing his sight in pursuit of power. This method, while slow, would let him awaken the Byakugan safely and on his own terms. After I awaken my Byakugan, it still has to keep evolving. I can't keep relying on human control. That power will eventually overwhelm my eyes. So it can only serve as an absolute last resort, not a sustainable strategy. Then it hit Nathan. If he could push his Mangekyo Sharingan all the way to the eternal Mangekyo Sharingan, eliminating the risk of blindness, might he use it as a steady, dependable ability? He sat there tapping the edge of the operating table, lost in thought. Minutes later, a relieved smile spread across his face. The more he considered it, the more feasible it seemed, perhaps even likely. And he'd already made up his mind. His Sharingan's innate capacity for continuous evolution, a legacy from his ancestors, was far more promising than attempting to forge a new technique for the Byakugan, like the legendary reflection of the heart, at least in the short term. Nathan studied the progress meter for his Mangekyo Sharingan, 14,416 out of 50,000. At this rate, he could attain eternal Mangekyo status within a year, so there was no need to rush. And although he still hadn't fully awakened his Byakugan bloodline, it didn't hinder his ability to use the Byakugan. It simply meant he couldn't amplify its power yet. That limitation was tolerable for now, so he decided to postpone any attempt at awakening that lineage. He exhaled, feeling the tension drain from his shoulders. The next problem was how to conceal the extra eye in his brow. Even when deactivated, the Byakugan seal remained faintly visible, too obvious to go unnoticed. Nathan's gaze drifted down to the skill bar on his interface. He skimmed past the refined ninjutsu and advanced techniques until he reached the two sealing arts at the bottom, Guardian Seal and Sealing Array. These, he realized, might hold the key to hiding his hidden eye. Nathan dismissed the second approach. It wouldn't help him solve the problem at hand. Instead, he focused on the first, a seal capable of hiding his Byakugan from prying eyes. The catch was that, having abandoned the subtle extraction technique some time ago, he'd only invested 5,000 chakra points into this concealment seal. As a result, his proficiency sat precariously at level 2, 250,500, hardly enough to make him feel secure. He needed to change that. With a flick of his wrist, Nathan released the shadow clone technique. In an instant, the two duplicates, one in the hall, the other outside the cave, dissolved into nothingness. On his chakra display, the gauge jumped from just over 20,000 to more than 80,000 points. Glancing at the sky, he noted it wasn't even 2 p.m., yet dusk would be upon him in roughly 5 hours. By combining active cultivation with passive recovery, he could regenerate over 12,000 chakra points each hour, about 60,000 more before nightfall. Adding that to his 80,000 meant a total reserve of roughly 140,000 chakra. If he poured every last point into practicing the Guardian Seal, he estimated an increase of about 1,400 proficiency points, just enough to vault from level 2 to level 4. That would be a game changer. Now, all that remained was to get to work. Nathan hadn't yet reached the true breakthrough of level 5, but he'd already crossed the level 3 threshold, enough to slip under ordinary detection. With his current strength and standing, no one could possibly miss the signs of a hidden cultivation, and if any fool did, Nathan wouldn't hesitate to use them as fodder for his own advancement. All right, let's get to work. He sprang off the operating table. Crossing his forearms, he formed the Ren hand seal and called upon the shadow clone technique. In an instant, chakra smoke billowed outwards, and 4 perfect duplicates of Nathan emerged. 5 Nathans in total. They exchanged a single, knowing glance, then silently dispersed to 5 corners of the hall. There, each one settled into a stance and began practicing the Guardian Seal in earnest. The vast chamber fell into a hush, broken only by the faint hum of focused chakra. 30 minutes later, the primary Nathan swept his arms in a final seal, dissolving all 4 clones at once. He absorbed their memories, every mistake, every insight, instantly converting that feedback into raw proficiency. With a subtle shift of his chakra, he reformed the Ren seal and unleashed 4 new shadow clones, each ready to carry on the drill. Clone after clone, cycle after cycle, Nathan refined the Guardian Seal until its power and precision felt as natural as his own heartbeat. 5 hours slipped away in what felt like minutes. Nathan let out a tired breath as he stared at the mission panel. His Guardian Seal had just reached level 4. A weary smile curved his lips. He closed his eyes, absorbing the rush of insight from the promotion. Then, without missing a beat, he formed the familiar hand signs and pressed his palm to his brow. In an instant, intricate seal patterns flared to life, spreading across his face and converging on the third, milky white eye embedded in his forehead. The sight was intimidating, but Nathan remained calm. Mid-chant, his hand seals shifted, and he gave a low command. Seal. The swirling sigils snapped shut around the central eye, then vanished as one. The pale ocular glyph disappeared too, leaving only a faint, shaped scar where it once rested. Nathan raised a water mirror with a flick of his fingers, inspecting his forehead. Satisfied, he reached for his Konoha headband, tied it firmly around his brow, and watched the remaining mark fade away completely. He tapped the headband, nodded once, and let a quiet smile rest on his face. As long as no one examined him closely, the secret of his white eye would remain undiscovered. Nathan let out a relieved breath and leaned against the rough stone wall, closing his eyes to restore his chakra. After a short rest, he felt his energy return. Focusing his will, he formed the hand seals Fawa, our wind style, wind wings. Instantly, a pair of translucent, gust-driven wings sprouted from his shoulder blades, lifting him into the air. Within moments, he was soaring toward the distant silhouette of the Blackstone stronghold. Chapter 488, Discovery. An hour later, twilight was settling over the valley as Nathan finally approached the Blackstone stronghold. It was far too late to continue flying, and though his mission was accomplished, and he no longer cared if anyone learned he'd slipped out alone, it made sense to avoid unnecessary attention. Besides, patrols from Kirigakure still prowled the stronghold's perimeter, and his chakra reserves were all but spent. He edged forward in the shadows, heart pounding, every sense alert to the faintest sound. But trouble had already found him. About a kilometer behind, a squad of mist ninja came to an abrupt halt. One of them crouched beside a low-slung dog, no taller than a calf, and murmured, "Happy anything?" The animal's ears twitched as it inhaled, its psychic beast heritage granting it a nose far keener than any ordinary hound's. Even the subtlest traces of a chakra signature couldn't escape it. The ninja glanced around, voice low and urgent. He must be close. Happy, pick up his scent. Happy pressed its muzzle to the ground and began to sniff methodically, searching the underbrush for any sign of Nathan's presence. The fading light cast long shadows, and Nathan froze in place, every muscle tensed. If the dog caught his scent, the operation would be blown, and escape at this point was almost impossible. Happy lifted his snout and sniffed the air, then straightened and said in a low, serious voice, "Boss, we may have a problem." His tone was surprisingly grave for such a small creature, and every shinobi present went taut. Inoue Ryu, knowing Happy didn't sound alarm bells lightly, snapped, "What is it?" Happy drew in another breath. "I'm picking up a familiar scent." "In whose?" Ryu asked, narrowing his eyes. "Uchiha Seimei," Happy replied. Ryu's heart skipped. "That can't be." Before he could say more, the other three team members yelped, instantly drawing kunai and adopting defensive stances. They weren't overreacting, they simply couldn't afford to be careless. Unlike Ryu, a special jonin, they were only chunin level, and confronting Ghost Sword Nathan head-on was a fool's errand. The violent clashes of the past week had made that painfully clear. Nathan was nothing like the other Konoha jonin, those who sneered at lowly opponents and never lifted a finger to stop them. From the moment he crossed paths with a Kirigakure chunin, he struck without hesitation. Naturally, this made them uneasy. Nathan himself would quip, "Who says I don't need chakra? Without it, how could I hone my techniques amid fierce combat?" Once a jutsu like his instant sword technique reached perfection, using it again consumed chakra without any gain in mastery. To recoup those losses, he hunted the most cost-effective targets he could find, unprepared Kirigakure chunin. And that wasn't the only reason. Healing his allies also demanded vast amounts of chakra, so he needed a steady supply to mend their wounds. Who better to draw from than these vulnerable ninja? It was no surprise, then, that every Kirigakure chunin trembled at the mere mention of Nathan's name. At that moment, Happy spoke up again, breaking the tense quiet. "Something's off with him." Inoue Ryu's eyes brightened. "What do you mean?" He lifted his head, glancing toward the spot where Happy had been sniffing the air, expecting to see Nathan soaring overhead. Happy shook his head impatiently. "He's not in the sky. Stop looking up." Ryu lowered his gaze, frowning. Happy pressed on. "My senses tell me he's in the forest ahead, and it looks like he's getting ready to return to the Blackstone stronghold." "In the forest?" Ryu echoed, disbelief coloring his tone. In that instant, not only Inoue Ryu, a special jonin famed for his intelligence gathering and analysis, but also the three Kirigakure chunin standing with him all registered the same startling realization. For the past fortnight, Nathan had never traveled on foot, he always flew. Yet now he was moving under the cover of trees, keeping his head down and avoiding detection. He was going G to ground, keeping a low profile as he made his way back to the stronghold. The four of them exchanged uneasy glances as they skirted the perimeter of Blackstone's stronghold. Happy's earlier warning about Nathan's weakened chakra had planted a seed of doubt in their minds, and once that seed takes root, it's hard to forget every What if? They told themselves Nathan must have been wounded on some dangerous mission, forced to retreat here to recover. After all, a diminished aura usually signals injury, right? No one questioned whether he'd merely overextended himself for another reason. Stories that threaten our self-interest are the first we learn to ignore. Each of them silently weighed the advantages. If Nathan really was vulnerable, eliminating him, or at least helping to do so, could shift power their way. Their hearts raced at the thought. Yet none of them paused to consider that Nathan's chakra might have simply run low. At last, it was Inoue-ryu who took a steadying breath and waved off their furtive glances. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves," he said, crouching beside Happy. "Show me his aura again." Happy closed his eyes and reached out with his senses. When he opened them moments later, his expression was solemn. "It's weaker than before," he confirmed. Ryu rose, dusting off his hands. They were now close enough to see the fortress walls loom above them. No more second-guessing. Whatever Nathan's condition, they would act on what they knew, and Ryu had made up his mind. He turned to one of the Kirigakure Chunin and ordered, "Hideaki, fall back to the outpost at once. Inform Captain Osawa of what's happened here, and request immediate reinforcements." "Yes, Captain," Hideaki saluted crisply. As Hideaki melted into the shadows, a flicker of relief crossed his features. Chasing down Inoue-ryu might bring him greater honor, but it also carried far more risk. Better to bow out now. After all, they weren't facing just any shinobi. This was the Ghost Sword Nathan, one of Konoha's dreaded twin stars. Even the village's official bounty on his head would turn green with envy. A modest success was better than courting disaster. Once Hideaki was gone, Inoue-ryu looked down at his ninkin Happy and spoke softly. "Happy, pick up his trail. Find him." "Arf?" Happy responded, nose to the ground. In an instant, the dog was streaking off in one direction. Inoue-ryu glanced over his shoulder at his two remaining teammates. "Stay close and follow," he said. Then, without waiting for another word, he sprinted after Happy into the night. The two mist-hidden ninjas behind him tightened their grip on their kunai and hurried after him. On the other side of the forest, Nathan moved forward with the utmost caution. Then, without warning, he froze and glanced over his shoulder. For some inexplicable reason, he felt as though someone was watching him. "An illusion?" he whispered. He paused to listen, to sense any presence, but detected nothing. Shaking his head, he lifted his foot to continue, only to stop again, his instincts screaming at him to hold back. In a world where chakra and jutsu reign supreme, intuition often proves more reliable than any physical sense, Nathan reminded himself. It was the subconscious mind tying together tiny details you might otherwise overlook. He decided to investigate, but first he needed to be certain there was no one around. With a deep breath, he activated his newly transplanted Byakugan, then quickly switched to his Sharingan to sweep the canopy and undergrowth with crimson, rippling tomoes. The forest fell silent. No hostile chakra signatures revealed themselves. Satisfied, there was no immediate threat. At least within visible range, Nathan sprang upward, landing lightly on a broad cedar branch. From this higher vantage, he could survey the surrounding trees and paths, ensuring he wouldn't be ambushed from behind. His eyes remained sharp, every nerve on edge, ready for whatever might come next. Nathan closed his Sharingan, lifted a hand to release the guardian seal on his brow, and centered his focus to awaken the Byakugan between his eyebrows. In a heartbeat, his pale eyes pierced through the forehead protector, revealing every detail across a full kilometer in every direction. Chapter 489, Total Annihilation. In the blink of an eye, Nathan noticed Inoue-ryu and the others closing in. He frowned, muttering to himself, "They're following me?" He shifted his gaze, activating his Byakugan. Gone were the hazy chakra readings he once saw with his Sharingan. Now he could trace every swirl of energy, every pressure point along their meridians. "As I thought," he said under his breath, "Byakugan really is superior for reconnaissance." He scanned the group methodically, one special jonin, two chunin, and a ninja dog. The animal's chakra signature was unmistakable, roughly on par with a chunin-level shinobi. Nathan's lips curved into a confident smile. They thought they could hunt him down unopposed. They were about to find out just how wrong they were. Although judging a ninja or a canine companion solely by chakra reserves isn't perfectly precise, there's no denying that one's chakra capacity largely defines their upper limit. A rare few can shatter that ceiling through unmatched skill in ninjutsu, genjutsu, or taijutsu, but such prodigies are exceptions. Most shinobi simply lack that kind of talent, making chakra-based estimates of an enemy's strength generally reliable. Nathan, however, is far from ordinary. Many of his techniques have reached perfection, so once he determines that an adversary's power falls below a certain threshold, he no longer needs to worry about hidden genius or unexpected tricks. By his calculations, the three figures and their dog trailing him clearly don't exceed that limit. With that knowledge, he need not extend them any courtesy. Even though his chakra reserves are currently running low, they're still ample to handle these opponents. And best of all, he seized the initiative, something every ninja knows can decide the outcome before the first blow is struck. Nathan didn't hesitate to drain the prisoners to refill his nearly spent chakra reserves, but he couldn't afford to dally. This was missed territory, and the longer he stayed, the more likely he'd draw the attention of passing ninja teams. He still had the Guardian Seal in reserve, an invaluable technique he might need after their upcoming fight, so he opted not to use it just yet. He closed his eyes and pressed his Konoha forehead protector over his brow to settle his mind. Then, with a swift motion, he formed the familiar hand seal and unleashed the shadow clone technique. In an instant, swirling chakra smoke billowed out, resolving into a perfect copy of Nathan himself. Nathan slipped off his coat and handed it to the clone. "Put this on and move ahead. Keep going until you've put enough distance between us," he instructed. The clone nodded without a word, pulling the heavy garment around its shoulders before vanishing into the swirling mist. With his decoy dispatched, Nathan melted into the treetops. He stilled his breathing, suppressed his chakra signature, and clung to the safety of the canopy, ready for whatever came next. Nathan pressed himself flat against the branch, eyeing the ninja dog below. He'd known all along that they were tracking him by its keen sense of smell, and now he could turn that to his advantage. 2 minutes later, 3 shinobi and the hound arrived in the small clearing beneath him. The dog, Happy, was out in front, its nose twitching in the wind. Suddenly, Happy froze. Inoue Ryu, who was walking just behind the dog, halted as well. "What's wrong, Happy?" Ryu asked, crouching down. The dog's muzzle wrinkled as it sniffed the air, nostrils flaring. "Something's off," Happy growled softly. "Our quarry paused here a while ago. Then the scent split. One trail continues straight ahead, the other veers to the right." Happy lifted its head again, ears pricked. Up in the branches, Nathan's hand closed around the hilt of a gleaming white blade. In that instant, the hound sensed death. It opened its mouth to howl, ready to dispel the necromantic spell Nathan had woven around its mind. But before a sound escaped, 2 blood-red eyes snapped into view. Born of the Sharingan, they pierced Happy's thoughts and drew the dog into a perfect illusion. Happy shook its head fiercely, fighting to break free of the genjutsu, but all strength fled and its limbs went slack. Below, Inoue Ryu's eyes widened in alarm as Happy collapsed to the forest floor, eyes glazed over. The trap had sprung. Nathan stepped silently from the canopy, white sword in hand, and the true ambush began. Click! A sharp crack echoed as Nathan's long knife bit into Happy's neck. The blade sliced through flesh, struck bone, hesitated for a heartbeat, then plunged deeper until the head was severed. The dog's head flew off, skidding across the ground before coming to rest. Its eyes, frozen wide in disbelief, bore silent testament to an unexpected end. Happy was a psychic beast, bound by a spiritual contract that should have allowed it to break free the moment its master fell. Under normal circumstances, even if the summoner died, the beast could dispel the spell and escape unharmed. But Nathan had exploited the one weakness no contracted creature could withstand, an illusion so complete that removal of the spell became impossible. Once entrapped in that perfect mirage, death was inevitable. And so, when Nathan activated his illusion, Happy's fate was sealed. "Inoue Ryu," Nathan murmured, sheathing his blade. Across the clearing, Ryu's dark eyes burned red with shock and grief. Happy had been more than a mere summoning beast to him. They had been inseparable companions since childhood. Now, confronted with the lifeless body at his feet, Ryu's breath came in ragged gasps. The bond they shared offered no solace here, only a raw, haunting void where trust and loyalty once stood. Nathan's mentor had taught him countless ninja techniques and saved his life more times than he could count. Their bond was stronger than family, closer than brothers. And now his mentor lay dead, a victim of Inoue Ryu's cruelty. Fury burned in Nathan's chest. Swish! A spray of kunai shot from Inoue Ryu's hand, aiming straight for Nathan's vital organs. But Nathan was unnervingly calm. As the blades closed in, his Mangekyo Sharingan flared to life. With a subtle twist of chakra, he activated the left eye pupil technique, Ten no Mi, Heaven's Control. In the next heartbeat, Happy, Inoue Ryu's most trusted subordinate, crumpled to the ground, felled by a single strike. Nathan had no intention of lingering to answer questions. First, he silenced any witnesses. Then, he unleashed his ultimate ability. The world seemed to shudder as the air around him rippled, and in an instant, Nathan vanished. Inoue Ryu and the two mist-hidden ninja sentries, already poised to pounce, froze in shock. They scanned the empty battlefield, frantically searching for any trace of him. But Heaven's Control placed Nathan beyond the reach of mortal perception, like a ghost slipping through the cracks of reality. Nathan slipped behind Inoue in the blink of an eye, unleashing the power of Heaven's Control the moment he materialized. Ryu's eyes widened in shock as he twisted to evade the attack, but his reflexes were too slow. With a soft puff, Nathan's longsword drove through Ryu's back and emerged from his belly. A fountain of blood spurted from Ryu's mouth. He glanced over his shoulder and caught sight of Nathan's eyes, dark as twin voids. "You," Ryu rasped, but Nathan cut him off with a single palm strike to the temple. Ryu slumped to the ground, unconscious before he could utter another word. Without pausing to absorb chakra, Nathan drew his blade and focused on the two remaining mist shinobi. He invoked Heaven's power again, and his form dissolved from sight. The pair pressed back to back, glancing wildly around the clearing, their breaths shallow and hearts racing. Yet in the face of Heaven's Control, their heightened vigilance offered them no refuge. Nathan materialized in a flash between the two advancing thugs, his body a blur of motion. In a heartbeat, his fists and boots struck out in a relentless flurry, each blow landing with enough force to send them sprawling across the dirt. No sooner had they scrambled to their feet than he drew in a deep breath, channeling his chakra into a single, devastating strike, the Heavenly Fist. A glowing wave of energy rocked the nearest man so violently he crumpled unconscious before he could react. The third attacker lunged at Nathan's flank, but the moment the man stepped forward, Nathan let his Sharingan flare to life. Without expending another ounce of chakra, he activated his Heavenly Guardian technique. In 2 precise heartbeats, he exploited a crack in the man's defenses, weaving a subtle genjutsu that seized control of his mind. The victim staggered to his knees, eyes glazed and unseeing, before Nathan delivered a merciful, yet final, blow. Even the guard dog, lunging with bared fangs, went down under the same mental snare, its snarls cut short in an instant. When the last echo of struggle faded, the clearing lay still, 3 bodies and a single fallen beast, the only witnesses to Nathan's lethal efficiency. Chapter 490, Return and Awakening. Nathan exhaled softly, allowing his Sharingan to fade. Without hesitation, he crossed the short distance to Inoue Ryu. Ryu's abdomen was a crimson wasteland, blood oozing in dark rivulets, his breathing ragged and shallow. Nathan couldn't bear the thought of losing such a valuable reservoir of chakra. This was not the time to let resources slip away. Swiftly, he formed the seals for his chakra absorption technique and pressed his palm against Ryu's injured side. Immediately, a torrent of chakra flowed from the wounded shinobi's meridians into Nathan's own network, seamlessly converting into fresh reserves. Within moments, Ryu's final breath escaped him, and Nathan released the jutsu. He checked his chakra gauge, a gain of 10,000 points. It wasn't on par with the reserves of a typical special jonin, but given how severely Ryu had been maimed, his physical vitality and mental stamina all but drained, harvesting even that much was a testament to Nathan's extraordinary skill and ruthless efficiency. Nathan's early promotion of his chakra absorption technique to level 6 proved invaluable. Without it, he couldn't have harvested so much energy. Shifting his attention from his current opponent, he strode over to the two remaining mist-hidden ninjas. With a flick of his fingers, he formed the requisite hand seals and activated the chakra absorption technique once more. One of the two lay unconscious at his feet, knocked out by Nathan's swift strike. The other remained standing, but was trapped in an unbreakable illusion. Neither had suffered serious injury. The encounter had been over almost as soon as it began, and both adversaries had expended very little chakra. As a result, they transferred over 18,000 chakra points to Nathan, far more than he would have gained from a chunin on the battlefield. A wave of relief washed over him. Including the third ninja he'd subdued earlier, Nathan now held nearly 30,000 points of chakra, over 90% of a Jonin's full reserves. Even without tapping into his own stores, he was fully charged for the time being. Yet despite his success, Nathan had no intention of staying long. Today's operation had been executed flawlessly and wrapped up in record time, but it had tested his spirit and willpower to their limits. He needed to move on before complacency set in. With a final glance at the subdued ninjas, he sheathed his chakra-darkened blade and melted into the mist. Nathan knew he desperately needed time to recover, both body and mind. He couldn't afford to stay here another moment. Gathering the three bodies and the wounded dog, he arranged them at his feet, raised his hands to form the sealing signs, and unleashed fire release ash pile technique. A roaring sphere of flame consumed the corpses in an instant. As the fire died away, Nathan activated his guardian seal, cloaking the charred remains so they could never be tracked. He opened his pale, unseeing eyes and swept the surrounding terrain, no movement within a kilometer. Satisfied that the scene was secure, he turned on his heel and sprinted toward the Blackstone stronghold. He didn't realize that mere moments after he vanished, a squad of Mist Village shinobi appeared on the scene. Leading them was Yuki Wuwa, the ice-style specialist he and Uchiha Shisui had ambushed not long ago. Behind her stood several Mist Jonin and one Chunin, Ito Hideaki, dispatched by Inoue Ryu with an urgent message. Clearly, these men had been dispatched by the enemy to deal with him. But Nathan was too fast. They never even saw him coming. Now they stood over the smoldering, charred remains of his would-be captors, fists clenched in impotent rage. There was nothing left to do but curse the night. By the time Nathan slipped back into the Blackstone stronghold, dawn was still hours away. He made a quick stop at the command center, confirmed there were no new orders for him, then retreated to his quarters. He didn't bother with sword drills or meditation. He simply crawled into bed and surrendered to exhaustion. After all, there was no better cure for fatigue than a long, uninterrupted sleep. He awoke only when the first slanting rays of sunlight found their way through the cracked window and warmed his face. For the first time in months, he felt truly rested. The wariness of yesterday's escape and the countless nights spent scraping together rest melted away in that simple golden light. Nathan stretched out, his joints popping in satisfied protest. Ah, now that's more like it. He threw back the covers, swung his legs over the side of the bed, and padded across the floor. At the wash basin, he splashed cold water on his face, the shock of it sharpening him for whatever the day might bring. Nathan stared at his reflection in the mirror, frowning as he took in the faint symbol etched between his eyebrows. It looked almost like a pakf. When he pressed a fingertip against it, a familiar surge of power pulsed through him, proof that the Byakugan still lay dormant beneath its seal. Yesterday's transformation hadn't been a hallucination. He had truly awakened this ability. One less weakness, he thought with a quiet smile. He picked up his washcloth again, letting the warm water trickle over his skin while his mind raced ahead. For now, he would set aside the unfinished Byakugan lineage until his Mangekyo Sharingan evolved into the eternal Mangekyo Sharingan. That would come in time. His immediate priority was to sharpen the skills he already possessed. First on his agenda, upgrading his Earth Release escape techniques. Only by increasing their rank could he learn to manipulate Earth-Nature chakra with precision. Once he'd achieved that mastery, he would turn his attention to Lightning Release. With Earth and Lightning under his belt, and Fire, Water, and Wind already within reach, he would command all 5 chakra natures, leaving no gaps in his arsenal of ninjutsu. And then, no obstacle would stand in his way. Nathan could counter any ninjutsu his enemies threw at him. What made him even more formidable was the prospect of mastering the so-called bloodline network by combining both yin and yang chakra. This ability far surpassed ordinary bloodline limits and even the most powerful bloodline suppression techniques. In Nathan's memory, every skill classified under the bloodline network was an awe-inspiring display of power. Take the Yoki Hirasaka, for example. Without seals or hand signs, a shinobi could tear open a pitch-black portal and step freely between dimensions. Or consider the bone weapon techniques that, on impact, unleashed the fatal mutual killing ashes, reducing a body to dust in seconds, an affliction even the famed yin-yang escape technique couldn't cure. These were terrifying arts, yet the mere possibility that he might one day wield similar powers was enough to fuel Nathan's resolve. Best of all, tapping into the bloodline network didn't demand some miraculous surge of energy, just diligent, step-by-step practice to master the fundamentals. With that in mind, there was no question of giving up. Chapter 491, War Breaks Out Again. Nathan stepped out of his quarters at first light, planning to grab a hearty breakfast in the cafeteria. As he rounded the corner of the mess hall, a distant series of muffled booms stopped him in his tracks. He paused, closed his eyes, and tuned his ears to the rhythm of the blasts. Boom, boom, boom. His eyes snapped open. Those weren't ordinary explosions. They were the telltale crackle of sealing talismans going off. "The Mist are attacking again," he muttered under his breath. Without a second thought, Nathan retrieved a handful of ration pills from his ninja pouch and popped them into his mouth. He chewed quickly, the familiar grainy crunch filling his senses as warmth spread through his belly. Satisfied, he swept his hand into a hand seal and called out, "Wind release, wind wings." A gust of wind roared to life around him, lifting him effortlessly into the sky. Within seconds, Nathan soared over the western perimeter of the base and hovered above the dense forest. Below him, two forces clashed in the shadows of the towering pines, a squad of mist ninjas trading blows with Konoha shinobi. Steel rang on steel, and the forest floor pulsed with flashes of chakra. Nathan surveyed the fray, ready to tip the balance back in Konoha's favor. Compared to the small Konoha reconnaissance team, the mist shinobi held the advantage in numbers, 12 warriors organized into 3 squads. Recognizing they couldn't win a straight fight, the Konoha scouts resorted to a desperate tactic. They scattered explosive tags throughout the area, detonating them in rapid succession. The deafening blasts served a dual purpose, alerting their hidden base and summoning reinforcements. Their gambit paid off. From a nearby cliff edge, Nathan appeared in a swirl of wind-release chakra. He immediately activated his Sharingan, sweeping his crimson eyes over the battlefield. Within his line of sight, only a handful of mist ninja remained visible, but he could hear distant skirmishes echoing through the trees. Clearly, the enemy wasn't focused solely on this reconnaissance party. They'd struck again after a day's lull, just as Nathan had predicted. He didn't worry about those other clashes for now. He was confident the base's defenders had already sprung into action. His attention returned to the dozen mist shinobi arrayed below him. Mouth curling into a predatory grin, Nathan's gaze gleamed with hungry intent. He knew he needed to conserve chakra, but the prospect of taking down these targets was simply too tempting. To fully master the earth release element, Nathan needed to raise his proficiency in the 3 earth release techniques listed on his scroll. The easiest to train was earth release, hardening technique. Even though he'd only ever committed 20,000 chakra points to fire release, Susanoo's technique before, it still returned 50,000 chakra points a day, enough to boost the hardening technique by 500 proficiency points every 24 hours. That alone brought him almost to his goal. His other 2 earth release skills, Turbo Mudgun and Earth Flow Wall, had received no additional chakra since he first unlocked them, and their progress had stalled. To spur them onward, he needed an outside source of chakra. Below him, 3 squads of mist ninja patrolled the forest. Aside from one squad's captain, a special jonin, the rest were chunin, just the level of power Nathan preferred for quick, controlled training. Without hesitation, he angled his wings and descended toward them. Nathan hovered above the fray, showing no sign of landing. Instead, he raised his hand, wove a series of seals, and unleashed a powerful ninjutsu, fire style, great dragon fire technique. With a thunderous roar, a torrent of flame blasted from his mouth, instantly splitting into 3 sinuous fire dragons that dove toward the mist ninjas below. Feeling the blistering heat overhead, the mist ninjas broke formation and scattered in panic. The Konoha shinobi on the ground finally exhaled in relief, their eyes fixed on Athens' lofty figure. Nodding at them, Nathan wove another set of seals to activate his heart-to-heart connection technique, linking their chakra for a combined strike against Kirigakure's special jonin. The remaining enemies, he decided, could fend for themselves. Obediently, 4 Konoha warriors leapt into action, their movements flowing together as they converged on the hidden village's elite shinobi. Seeing them close in, other Kirigakure Chunin readied to intervene, but Nathan was already a step ahead. He pinpointed the fastest runner among the newcomers, formed a fresh hand seal, and breathed another flame jutsu, fire style, verdant flame whirl. A spiraling vortex of emerald fire roared across the clearing, cutting off the Chunin's advance with searing heat. Caught off guard, the Kirigakure shinobi stumbled as the swirling blaze swallowed their escape route, leaving them trapped by Nathan's unrelenting assault. Thanks to his Sharingan's penetrating insight, Nathan unleashed the technique with far greater precision than any ordinary Anbu or root shinobi. The Kirigakure Chunin barely had time to react before jets of black flame erupted across his skin, instantly engulfing him in searing heat. "Ah!" he screamed, ripping at his tunic and rolling on the ground, desperately trying to smother the inferno. But Nathan's unwavering chakra continued to feed the blaze, making it nearly impossible to extinguish. Recognizing their comrades' dire straits, the 2 remaining mist shinobi sprang into action. With swift hand seals, they summoned twin torrents of water that crashed down on the burning man in hissing sheets of steam. As the flames finally died out, Nathan cut off his chakra supply. The Chunin lay sprawled, panting and defeated, his fighting spirit all but extinguished. But his would-be rescuers were neither safe nor recovered. Before they could regroup, Nathan's Sharingan had already locked onto their next moves. With a swift flick of his wrist, he sent a storm of razor-edged shurikens spinning toward them. Nathan's opponents never had a chance. Though they managed to dodge several shuriken, 2 still found their mark, non-fatal strikes, but enough to cripple their mobility. Seizing the advantage, Nathan unleashed Fire Release, Dragon Fire Jutsu. 3 colossal dragons of flame spiraled through the air, each one scorching a target. The 2 wounded shinobi and a Kirigakure Chunin who'd rushed in to aid the special jonin. Under the onslaught of burning worms, all 3 fled in panicked disarray. Pushing his Mangekyou Sharingan to its limit, Nathan locked onto the nearest Chunin, mapping out every step of his escape. Then he wove his next technique, Wind Release, Wind Blade. His Wind Blade, perfected at level 7, was so finely honed that no ordinary eye could perceive it until it struck. The Kirigakure Chunin hardly had time to react. As he sprinted forward, a silent razor of compressed wind severed both legs at the knees. His upper body pitched on, sailing a few feet before crashing to the ground. Only then did he register the agony, his scream tearing through the battlefield. Nathan's legs were spurting blood, the dark liquid soaking the ground beneath him. Fearing his comrade wouldn't survive much longer, he flapped his wings and hovered down beside the fallen shinobi. Without a moment's hesitation, he formed a hand seal and unleashed the shadow clone technique. With a crackle of chakra, 4 perfect duplicates erupted into being around him. Before Nathan even gave them orders, the clones sprang into action, cutting down the remaining 9 Kirigakure Chunin in a whirlwind of steel and chakra. Meanwhile, Nathan turned his attention back to the man before him, Ando Keiji, whose leg injury was already seeping deathly pale. As Keiji caught sight of Nathan striding toward him, panic flickered in his eyes. Summoning his last strength, he hurled a kunai at Nathan, only to watch it strike air. Calmly, Nathan tilted his head aside, the blade clattering uselessly to the ground. In the next heartbeat, Nathan was on him. He plunged his hand into Keiji's chest, activating chakra absorption. A surge of stolen energy pulsed through Nathan, and Keiji's strength drained away in an instant. Clutching the Chunin's throat, Nathan watched the light dim from his opponent's eyes. Another victory won at a terrible price. Chapter 492, Solution and Harvest. Nathan withdrew his palm. Moments earlier, where the shinobi had stood now, lay only a corpse, and with it some 7,000 chakra points had flowed into Nathan's reserves, a middling sum. Wasting no time, he brushed the blood from his hand and stepped toward the wounded mist ninja collapsing on the ground. The dying man's eyes flew open. "Go to hell, you little devil," he rasped, flinging himself forward in a final, desperate lunge. Nathan's face remained impassive. In the moonlight, his 3 Tomoe Sharingan glowed crimson, every detail of the ninja's movement recorded with cold precision. In an instant, a blade of chakra ignited in Nathan's right hand. With a soft sizzle, the ninja's reaching arm snapped away and clattered onto the earth. Before the man could register what had happened, Nathan's left hand darted forward. He tore away the shredded remains of the ninja's sleeve, peeled back his belt, and ripped off a smoldering detonator tag fixed to the man's chest. Beneath it lay a time-release talisman, its seal already beginning to glow. The ninja's last breath caught in his throat. He had planned to kill them both in a final, fiery explosion, but under the relentless watch of Nathan's Sharingan, the scheme never stood a chance. Nathan's face remained impassive as he tossed the explosive talisman. It erupted with a thunderous blast, toppling a massive tree nearby, but Nathan himself was untouched. The Kirigakure Chunin across from him still tried to mount a defense, resolve flickering in his eyes. Seizing the moment, Nathan locked onto that gaze and activated his Sharingan, weaving an instantaneous illusion that froze the Chunin in place. Without hesitation, Nathan extended his hand and performed the chakra absorption technique. Tendrils of energy snaked from his palm, draining nearly 7,000 units of chakra from his immobilized foe. He allowed himself a small, satisfied nod as the power surged through him. Rising fluidly to his feet, Nathan scanned the broader battlefield. A Kirigakure Special Jonin was currently surrounded by 4 members of the Konoha reconnaissance team. By standard procedure, such a mission is led by a Special Jonin accompanied by 3 Chunin, and this squad was no exception. In other words, the Kirigakure Jonin faced 1 adversary of equal rank, plus 3 at a slightly lower level. Under these conditions, mounting any real offensive advantage seemed out of the question. Even holding his ground would be a formidable challenge. The 9 Kirigakure Chunin weren't faring much better. Although Nathan had only sent out 4 shadow clones, their durability was more than enough. Any direct hit would dispel them, but landing that blow was nearly impossible. Even paired against 2 Chunin at a time, the clones moved with astonishing speed and precision. They flitted around their opponents like wraiths, striking relentlessly and never giving the Kirigakure ninjas a moment's rest. From Nathan's vantage point, he watched 1 clone materialize behind a Chunin and clamp him to the ground, palm pressing into the center of his chest. In an instant, the swirling energy of a Rasengan formed in the clone's hand, and then detonated. Bang! The Chunin flew backward, slamming into the earth with a sickening crack. He coughed, a spray of blood painting the dirt beneath him. He tried to push himself upright, clutching at his ribs where the air had been driven out of him, but pain paralyzed his limbs. Just then, a hand reached down to help him up. Instinctively, the wounded Chunin stretched out his own hand to grasp it, unaware of who stood behind the gesture. The moment after, the Kirigakure Chunin froze in midair. He realized, with dawning horror, that the direction he'd been flung in was exactly toward Nathan's body. His eyes jerked to the outstretched hand that had caught him. A sudden numbness crept over his scalp. He followed the line of his own palm and beheld a face far too young, and unmistakably Nathan's. "You," he choked out. Before he could take another breath, the Chunin coughed up a spray of blood. He tried to scramble backward, put as much distance between them as possible, but Nathan was faster. With a single, fluid motion, he closed the gap and seized the Chunin's hand. In that instant, his eyes snapped shut, and the unmistakable pull of the chakra absorption technique took hold. A roiling flood of chakra gushed from the Chunin's body as though a dam had burst. Desperation ripped from his throat. No! In a last-ditch effort, the Kirigakure shinobi thrust a left hook straight at Nathan's face. The blow connected with a dull thud. Nathan's head snapped sideways, his cheek already swelling beneath the impact. Yet he didn't flinch or dodge. He simply absorbed the strike. The Chunin tried to summon strength for a second blow, but found his limbs leaden, his chakra all but drained away. He sagged, utterly spent, while Nathan opened his eyes and effortlessly reclaimed what little power remained. Nathan's self-healing ability kicked in instantly. The faint swelling on his cheek vanished within seconds, and one of the Kirigakure Chunin lay on the ground, completely drained of chakra. Everything had happened so fast that the other enemy shinobi didn't even have time to react, nor could they have rescued their comrade, with Nathan's 4 shadow clones cut off their path. Wasting no time, Nathan channeled the freshly harvested chakra through himself and leaped into the fray alongside his clones. It was as though the duplicates had suddenly found their backbone. They moved with ruthless precision. In less than 3 minutes, the 8 Kirigakure Chunin were all defeated. None managed to slip away. With the immediate threat neutralized, Nathan ordered 2 of his shadow clones to join the Konoha team in hunting down the Kirigakure Special Jonin. The remaining clones formed a perimeter around the fallen Chunin, while Nathan focused on extracting the residual chakra from their bodies. The sheer volume of energy was more than his physical form could safely contain, so he created several additional clones to help distribute and stabilize the influx. Calmly monitoring the flow of chakra, he ensured it was evenly spread across all his shadows, preventing any dangerous overflow as he continued to collect every last reserve. Nathan's 8 shadow clones hovered amidst the settling dust where the Kirigakure Special Jonin had fallen. After draining his opponent's chakra, Nathan estimated he'd absorbed nearly 90,000 chakra points from this single battle. That was more than enough to advance both Earth-style, Earth Flow Wall, and Earth-style, Earth Rising Spear by 1 level if he chose to split the gains evenly. But right now, there was no time to train. Instead, Nathan turned his mind to a more pressing long-term need, a chakra sealing technique, something akin to the yin seal, capable of safely storing large reserves of chakra. Opportunities to harvest chakra this way would be rare, and once he claimed a tailed beast's power, he'd need a reliable method to carry vast energies without hauling the beast along. Yes, a dedicated storage jutsu would be invaluable. Still, that was a project for later. For now, Nathan simply gathered his clones and prepared for whatever challenge lay ahead. Nathan decided to keep the shadow clone technique active for now. In his next fight, he'd use every opportunity to train the skills he still needed to master, ensuring none of his chakra went to waste. If he ran low, he could always refine Earth-style, Flowing Earth Wall, and Earth-style, Rising Earth Spear afterward once his reserves had recovered. After all, there was no need to be so inflexible in life. Chapter 493, New Orders and Turning Points. All right, let's move out. Having drained the last of the Mist Ninja's chakra, Nathan straightened and surveyed the 4 exhausted Konoha shinobi before him. Their chests heaved with heavy breaths, but at his words they fell into line without hesitation. 8 of Nathan's shadow clones flanked them as they set off toward the fortress. A decisive battle was inevitable, yet they first needed to regroup and confirm their assignments to ensure everyone's strength would be used to its fullest. Nathan had foreseen this exact sequence of events. No sooner had they crossed the fortress threshold than he was summoned by Sano Nobuhisa. There was no drawn-out briefing this time. Everyone's role had been settled over the past week, rendering formal meetings unnecessary. Sano wasted no words before issuing Nathan's new orders. As always, Sano began, "You'll spend tonight tending to the wounded. At first light, you and your unit become our rapid response force, ready to reinforce any front at a moment's notice." Nathan bowed and turned to prepare. Healing by night, striking by day. It was a simple plan, but it was exactly what they needed. For the past week, this mission had been all Nathan's focus, his chance to exploit his aerial advantage to the fullest. No sooner had he received the orders than he took off for the first battlefield. Several squads were already locked in combat there, and Konoha's forces had been caught off guard. Just like the earlier reconnaissance team, they found themselves outnumbered and struggling. Nathan's arrival, however, instantly swung the tide. Rather than dive straight into close-quarters combat against the Mist Shinobi as he had before, he remained aloft, making full use of his air superiority. From above, he unleashed a relentless barrage of long-range ninjutsu, forcing the enemy to scatter and regroup. On the ground, his shadow clones followed his example. They avoided extended hand-to-hand fights, instead peppering the mist shinobi with coordinated ninjutsu strikes. Every technique they deployed, every illusion they wove, served a single purpose: to push Nathan's own skills forward. Although battlefield conditions didn't always allow him to conserve chakra by using the absolute minimum for each jutsu, he pressed on, determined to refine his mastery with every exchange. Nathan knew that mastering this technique now would save him countless hours of training down the line. More importantly, it gave him the strength he needed on the battlefield. So whenever the moment demanded it, he never hesitated to tap into his chakra reserves or unleash his most devastating ninjutsu. Before long, the skirmish was over. Several shinobi from the mist and a handful from Konoha had fallen, the survivors scattered in retreat. With the mission complete, Nathan returned to base. Whenever there was a lull in operations, he devoted himself to refining two signature skills: the Palm Immortal technique and the art of reflecting the heart. If intelligence reports pointed to trouble elsewhere, he would launch himself into the sky and head straight for the next flashpoint, ready to reinforce his comrades. This rhythm, fight, train, then fight again, became his daily life. Every engagement tested him. Every quiet hour honed him. It was exhausting, but it was exactly what Nathan had planned. He was determined to grow stronger in the heat of war while helping to turn the tide. Today's battle proved his prediction correct. The Feiyu Genwu ninja were already preparing their next strike. Over the coming 3 days, they returned to assault the Blackstone stronghold in small, agile teams, just as they had a week ago. In response, General Sano Nobuhisa dispatched squad after squad to meet them. Nathan squared his shoulders, readying himself for whatever came next. Each clash sharpened his skills, and each victory propelled him closer to the day when he could stand undefeated. On this small battlefield, the shinobi on both sides moved like merciless machines, striking, dodging, and dispatching one another in endless waves. It felt as though the fight would never end. 4 days had passed since the clash began. That morning, Nathan bolted upright in his makeshift tent and swallowed 2 replenishment pills to stave off the gnawing hunger in his stomach. He stuffed his kunai pouch into his belt and raced toward the headquarters conference room, half convinced that today, like every other, would bring nothing more than monotonous orders. To his surprise, he found Captain Sano Nobuhisa waiting at the head of the table, with Uchiha Shisui seated beside him. Sano's expression was unusually grave as he cleared his throat. "This just came in from Captain Nara Keimitsu," he said, tapping the message scroll. "He needs both of you to move immediately to Abaratsu port. Reinforcements are required on the west dock. You leave in 10 minutes. Nathan felt adrenaline spike through his veins. He shot a quick glance at Shisui, who offered a brief, knowing nod. The never-ending battle on the front lines would have to wait. Now there was a new mission, and failure was not an option. Nathan had suspected as much ever since Sano Nobuhisa let slip the village's contingency plans weeks ago. If the southern defenses ever faltered, Nara Keimitsu would surely call up every top jonin from the surrounding strongholds. What surprised him, however, was that he and Uchiha Shisui were tapped in the very first wave of conscription. Out of so many capable jonin, why were only the 2 of them chosen? He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it, some hidden motive behind their selection. At the same time, he knew that both he and Shisui had earned their reputations by merit. It wasn't unreasonable for Keimitsu to pick them first. Nathan weighed the possibilities, but found no concrete proof of foul play. Besides, with his current strength, no conspiracy could intimidate him. He would face whatever lay ahead, one step at a time. Shaking off his doubts, Nathan drew in a steady breath, met Sano Nobuhisa's steady gaze, and asked, "When do we leave?" "Right now," Nobuhisa replied. Nathan's brow furrowed. "You're worried?" Sano Nobuhisa nodded solemnly. After a brief hesitation, he leaned in and spoke in a low voice. "I have reason to believe Kirigakure discovered our village's plan. Since yesterday, their assaults have spiked without warning. We were completely caught off guard and took heavy losses. Now the southern defense line is bleeding men, and they need reinforcements immediately, so they've sent out urgent summons, including yours." At those words, Nathan's thoughts snapped into focus. The recent skirmishes on the southern front had been fierce, yes, but not enough to justify gutting every other stronghold for reinforcements. No routine clash ever prompted such sweeping troop transfers. And this order wasn't just sent to them. Every allied fortress was being tapped, even those already besieged by Kirigakure. Clearly, something had gone horribly wrong to trigger a call this desperate. Once you start pulling Jonin, the backbone and elite of our defenses, out of their posts, those strongholds are bound to fall. Nara Chiguang knows this better than anyone. He'd never order a withdrawal like that unless it was absolutely critical. Nathan had been puzzled at first, but now everything clicked into place. An information leak had tipped off Kirigakure, and that single breach had set this entire chain of events into motion. Relief washed over Nathan as his uncertainties melted away. He exchanged a few more words with Sano Nobuhisa, then stepped out of the war room alongside Uchiha Shisui. They were heading for Abaratsu Port together, a name that, in truth, referred to the gap torn open in Konoha's southern defenses by Kirigakure's forces. That breach would be the main arena for the next confrontation. Nathan stared southward, a knot of anticipation tightening in his chest. He sensed that the coming battle here might well decide the outcome of the Ninja World War. Win or lose, this would be the turning point. And he hoped, the beginning of the war's end. Chapter 494, Interception. Half an hour later, deep in the southwestern woods outside the Blackstone stronghold, Nathan and Uchiha Shisui crept forward, keeping low beneath the thick canopy. All around them, the aftermath of battle lay strewn across the forest floor. Broken weapons, discarded armor, and the faint echoes of distant skirmishes. Kirigakure ninja patrols still prowled these woods, so Nathan and Shisui moved with utmost care, weaving between trees and underbrush to avoid discovery. Normally, Nathan could have simply flown over the stronghold's ramparts and slipped away undetected. But with Shisui injured and reliance on overhead travel too risky, they chose to dash across the open battlefield instead. It was a dangerous gamble. One misstep could alert the fog-wreathed warriors to their presence, but both men possessed owned senses and reflexes far beyond ordinary shinobi. Shisui's Sharingan and Nathan's heightened perception allowed them to anticipate patrol routes and detour around enemy squads before a single step gave them away. Despite the chaos underfoot, craters from exploding tags, scorched earth, and snaking lines of cord, by moving with patience and precision, they navigated through the heart of the conflict. Discipline and stealth carried them safely past clusters of Kirigakure scouts, and after a tense hour, they finally broke clear of the front line, emerging unscathed on the other side. Without pausing to catch their breath, the two resumed a brisk run, following the map Nathan had memorized. Their destination was Yujin Port, a coastal haven that lay several miles north of the stronghold. The sun climbed high overhead, its rays filtering through ragged clouds as they raced across open fields. Wild grasses whipped at their legs, and the wind carried the distant clang of steel and shouts from troops still engaged behind them. By midday, the port town's spindly watchtower appeared on the horizon, framed by the dark line of forest that Nathan and Shisui were fast approaching. Ahead lay the shelter and anonymity they so desperately needed, but first they had to slip past one final barrier, the dense wood that guarded the last stretch of road to Yujin Port. With renewed urgency, they pushed into the trees, hearts pounding at the thought that at any moment Kirigakure forces might cut off their escape and intercept them before they could reach safety. Nathan and Shisui had been pushing through the forest for another half hour when they finally arrived at the rendezvous point. A thin veil of mist drifted between the trunks, and shafts of sunlight pierced the canopy overhead. In the shifting beams, droplets of moisture hung in the air like suspended diamonds, a breathtaking display of the Tyndall effect. But neither of them had time to admire the scene. It was nearly noon, and the humidity alone couldn't have conjured such a dense fog at this hour. Exchanging a silent glance, Nathan and Shisui instinctively dropped into a defensive stance, backs pressed together. Nathan closed his eyes and let his chakra flow outward, probing the air around him. Beneath the sweet tang of damp earth, another odor drifted through the haze, an all-too-familiar chakra signature. His mind snapped to attention. Kirigakure no Jutsu, the hidden mist technique of the village hidden in the mist. Before he could warn Shisui, a storm of kunai erupted from every direction. The sharp blades whistled through the mist like deadly rain, converging on the two shinobi with terrifying speed. Careful! Uchiha Shisui's warning cut through the chaos. He sprang forward, his Sharingan blazing, and swung his kunai up just in time to intercept a blade hurled at Nathan's back. To Shisui's amazement, Nathan hadn't budged. The kunai struck his skin with a harsh clang, but left no mark. In an instant, Nathan's flesh had taken on the texture of solid rock, impervious to the weapon's edge. That transformation wasn't luck. After 3 relentless days of training, his earth release hardening technique had advanced from level 5 to level 6, boosting both the speed and strength of his defenses well past what he'd ever managed before. Seizing the moment, Nathan fixed his gaze on the direction of the attack, planted his foot, and rocketed forward like a human cannonball. In the undergrowth ahead, a group of Kirigakure Chunin froze as he bore down on them. Panic flickered across their faces. They wanted to scatter, but their Jonin superiors pressed close behind, leaving them no room to flee. Nathan's sudden charge left the forest ringing with the sounds of crunching leaves and startled shouts, the balance of this skirmish shifting in an instant. At that moment, a Kirigakure Jonin bellowed, "Everyone, keep pressing the attack!" Obeying the order, a group of Kirigakure Chunin hurled kunai toward Nathan, while their Jonin leaders quietly slipped explosive tags onto several of the blades. It was a small trick, but not subtle enough to escape Nathan's keen perception. He activated his Sharingan and tracked the spinning weapons with a single fluid sweep of his gaze. His body was already fortified by earth release, body hardening, more than enough to shrug off any blast. But Nathan decided not to rely on brute resistance. Conserving chakra and staying ready for whatever came next, he let himself be hit. With a sharp stomp of his right foot, Nathan altered his trajectory. Instead of charging straight ahead, he slid to the side, leaving behind only a brief afterimage. Moments later, a dozen kunai tore through the air where he'd been standing, embedding themselves in the earth and the nearby tree trunks with a staccato chick-chick. Then the explosive tags detonated. A thunderous blast rocked the forest, sending shockwaves in all directions. Trees shuddered and leaves rained down as the echo of the explosion rippled through the clearing. Nathan stood firm, his senses alert, ready for the next move. Nathan crouched behind a stand of pines, his Sharingan gleaming. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. 3 razor-sharp shurikens shot from his hand, slicing through the branches and hurtling toward the mist ninja hiding beyond. 2 high-pitched screams split the air. 2 of the enemy had taken the hits. Nathan's ears flicked at their cries. Without pausing, he formed a hand seal and unleashed his ninjutsu. Fire release, Phoenix Immortal Blaze technique. A blazing sphere of flame erupted from his mouth, showering the forest clearing like a meteor swarm. "Scatter," he commanded. At once, the mist ninja peeled away their cloaks of fog and melted into the trees on either side. Nathan's Sharingan spun, locking onto every retreating figure. He shifted his seals, dispelling the Phoenix technique, then channeled fresh chakra into his next move. Fire release, Dragon's Inferno. A towering jet of fire burst free, twisting into 3 massive dragons of living flame. With deafening roars, the fiery beasts surged out of the clearing, one sweeping left, one charging center, and one veering right, pursuing the fleeing mist warriors through the underbrush. Nathan's seamless ninjutsu attack split the battlefield in 2. On the flanks, the mist ninjas slipped clear of the roaring fire drake, but 3 in the center were trapped. At the last instant, Nathan guided his left and right dragons to converge on that small pocket of shinobi, cutting off every avenue of escape. The 3 mist chunin sprang up together, hands weaving swift seals. Suiton, water array wall. A towering curtain of water erupted before them, locking down the center and flanks in one swift motion. Nathan's fire drake smashed into the barrier, its claws and fangs battering the wet rampart. The wall groaned and cracked, but held. A grim smile curled Nathan's lips. "Impressive," he murmured, eyeing the enemy's coordination. Shuriken and kunai hissed through the air, but he slipped between them like a shadow, barely slowing his momentum. Already, his fingers had begun the next sequence of seals. Doton, turbo gun. The earth trembled beneath the mist ninja's feet. With a deafening crack, dozens of jagged stones erupted from the ground and shot forward like cannon fire, each rock a high-velocity projectile aimed with deadly precision. Over the past 3 days, Nathan had siphoned more than 300,000 units of chakra from the Mist Village Shinobi. Nearly half of that hard-won energy had gone into mastering this very technique. Now the results spoke for themselves. The battlefield quaked under the power of his earth cannon, and nothing stood between Nathan and his objective. Nathan's Earth Escape Turbo Spear was now at level 4, albeit barely, but the slight boost was enough for what he had in mind. With the perfect opening before him, Nathan formed the final seal, slammed his foot into the ground, and poured Earth Escape chakra into the soil beneath him. Instantly, jagged earthen spikes shot up like lightning bolts, each one targeting a different Fog Village ninja. The precision was uncanny. It wasn't simply the raw power of a level 4 turbo spear that guided those spikes so accurately. It was the combination of Nathan's Sharingan and his newly promoted level 6 chakra control. His Sharingan allowed him to anticipate every flinch, every attempt to dodge. Meanwhile, the advanced chakra control refined each spike's trajectory, making his attack devastatingly precise. Thanks to that perfect synergy, what could have been a scattershot assault instead became a surgical strike, pinning his opponents before they even had time to react. Chapter 495 Brutal screams tore through the mist-shrouded pass. In a single fluid motion, Nathan slammed his palm into the earth, channeling chakra that rippled beneath the soil. Jagged spikes of rock erupted like spears, impaling several mist ninjas before they could react. Some fell, limbs shattered. Others staggered on crushed feet or bled out where they stood. In an instant, the enemy's ambush lay in ruins. Only 20 to 30 mist shinobi remained on their feet, clustered around 2 hidden mist jonin. Their wounded men lay scattered behind them, but not one had been killed outright, an unmistakable testament to their toughness. Nathan took a breath, gauging his foes. 2 jonin commanding such a well-trained force could only mean one thing. This was no random raid. They'd been sent specifically to block the pass, and this was the only route for Konoha's reinforcements coming up from the central and northern defenses. Every allied shinobi heading this way would be funneled through here. He allowed his eyes to drift over the narrow trail, the dense pines, the swirling mist that coiled around the warriors. Ahead, the mist jonin exchanged glances, calm and unreadable beneath their fog-veiled masks. Nathan felt the air tighten, as if the world itself were bracing for impact. He flexed his fingers, earth chakra dancing just beneath his skin. The mist had chosen their battleground. Now it was his turn to respond. Silence fell across the clearing, broken only by the distant drip of water from pine needles. In that pregnant pause, both armies waited, for a signal, a crack of tension, a single spark to unleash the storm. Nathan met the steely gaze of the nearest jonin. He didn't know who would strike first, or if the next clash would be his last. But he was ready. The only way through this pass, and to save his comrades, was to break the ambush here and now. And he would not back down. Nathan frowned as he scanned the small group before him. It was hard to believe the hidden mist had deliberately set a trap for him and Uchiha Shisui. What really unsettled him wasn't this handful of underpowered shinobi, it was how close they were to the main rendezvous point. If even a few mist ninja had slipped through, he could only imagine how dire the situation had grown near the gathering. He studied the 2 jonin up ahead. Neither displayed any remarkable skill, and they were backed by a scattering of chunin and genin. There was no way these rank-and-file shinobi could hope to challenge him or Shisui. If the hidden mist had truly planned an ambush here, the force arrayed against them would have been far larger and far more talented. After all, their battle records were public knowledge. The Mist Village couldn't be so reckless as to send only average troops against shinobi of their caliber. The real relief, Nathan realized, was that their position must still be secure. No one had leaked their location, at least not yet. If it had been exposed, the consequences would have been catastrophic, a sure sign of betrayal from within. For now, though, he could focus on the coming fight, and on uncovering how deep the danger really ran. Thieves are the hardest enemy to defend against. Nathan knew that better than anyone. He didn't want to spend every second watching his back, waiting for a traitor to strike. As uneasy thoughts churned through his mind, he snapped into action. Hands weaving swift seals, he unleashed a powerful ninjutsu. Fire style, great dragon fire technique. Though Nathan had perfected several sword forms, he preferred to reserve them for emergencies. Wasting chakra on sheer blade work served little purpose. Casting ninjutsu not only dealt damage but honed his skill too, a true 2-for-1. And if he found himself drained afterward, he could always harvest chakra from any surviving opponents. Nathan stepped back, eyes narrowing as 3 colossal dragons of flame erupted from his mouth. With a flick of his wrist, he sent them hurtling toward the scattered mist ninjas. The earlier onslaught had already broken their format, Ion, however, leaving few targets for the fire beasts to exact their vengeance upon. Still, Nathan welcomed every chance to refine his art and to keep his enemies firmly off balance. With so few targets in his path, Nathan found it effortless to evade the mist ninjas' counterattack. His 3 roaring fire dragons streaked forward, sailing harmlessly through their ranks before smashing into the grove behind them. Trees shattered and ignited in an instant. Boom, 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 as living wood turned to blazing tinder. Caught in the flash of heat, the mist ninjas scattered, retreating in every direction to escape the spreading inferno. Seizing the moment, Nathan formed a rapid hand seal and unleashed another jutsu, fire style, Sushoku Jutsu. A blazing sphere materialized in midair and rocketed toward one suspecting ninja. It engulfed him from head to toe, setting his armor and robes ablaze. He fell to the ground with a tortured scream, flailing as he pounded against the dirt to extinguish the flames. 2 of his comrades rushed to his side, desperate to smother the fire from his body. Nathan's lips curved in a silent grin. Perfect, he thought, ready to press the attack while his enemies were distracted and off balance. But before he could move, a shadow detached itself from the smoke and debris beside him. In one fluid motion, an arm snapped forward, a sickle-shaped kunai hooking under Nathan's chin. The metal edged closer to his throat, cold and unyielding. Nathan froze, caught off guard by the sudden appearance of this new assailant. Nathan braced himself as the sickle-shaped shuriken came hurtling toward him, its razor edge designed to slice through throat and carotid in a single, fatal arc. Such weapons thrived on surprise. Without warning, it was nearly impossible to parry perfectly, and even a glancing block could funnel you straight into a hidden trap. But Nathan was no ordinary warrior. The instant his opponent materialized, his peripheral vision flicked over the attack. In that split second, the 3 magatama embedded in his irises began to glow and whirl, compressing time itself. As the shuriken closed in, Nathan's reflexes and thought raced ahead of the blade. With a swift draw, he brought his longsword across the attack, deflecting it cleanly. Then, in the same fluid motion, he lunged forward and drove his dagger into Tanabe Tomohiko's chest. Tanabe's eyes snapped open in shock. His pupils shrank as he stumbled backward, forced into a desperate retreat. Nathan's foot hovered over the ground, ready to spring forward, until a sudden hail of kunai sliced through the air. He froze in place, lifting his long sword in a single graceful motion to catch each flying blade against its edge. The metal rang sharply as he tipped his head toward the source. 2 jonin stood waiting, a female shinobi on his left, and on his right, the very same jonin who had tried to ambush him moments before. They flanked him, weapons at the ready, every movement calculated to foil one of his Sharingan illusions. But caution alone couldn't match Nathan's skill. With a quick glance at the cluster of Mist Village Chunin gathering ahead, he decided to end this. Green chakra flared along his blade, enveloping him in a brilliant light. In an instant, he vanished, an illusion of speed he'd honed to perfection, the instant sword technique. "Watch out!" Tanabe Tomohiko's voice cut through the sudden hush, warning Koike Emi on the opposite flank as Nathan reappeared on the battlefield. Nathan zeroed in on the female shinobi. From their earlier teamwork, it was clear that Tanabe Tomohiko specialized in close combat, while Shaochi Huime provided support from a distance. Smart fighters always target the weaker link, so Nathan decided to take on Huime. He unleashed his perfected instant swordsmanship, propelling himself across 10 meters in the blink of an eye to strike. But Shaochi Huime was a bona fide jonin. Her close-quarters skills might not match Tomohiko's, yet they were formidable all the same. She met Nathan's attack head-on, parrying his blade with unerring precision. And that, Nathan knew, was only the beginning. Chapter 496, Escape Ding! Nathan's long knife rang against the Kirigakure Jonin's blade, sparks flying. He blurred out of sight, and the next instant he stood behind her. A cold gleam danced across his steel as he swung again. Koike Emi stiffened, raising her kunai to block the strike. But Nathan's attack was nothing more than a diversion. Before she could react properly, he unleashed his flash sword technique, darting around her in a heartbeat. He didn't even draw his blade. Instead, Nathan thrust out his left palm, chakra spiraling into a dense glowing sphere, the Rasengan. Emi's heart seized as the swirling orb hurtled toward her. For a moment, it felt as if the air itself was crushing her chest. Only her unyielding will as a Jonin kept her from faltering. Bang! The Rasengan collided with her body, but instead of tearing flesh, it burst harmlessly into a splash of water. Nathan's eyes narrowed. A water clone? He murmured, watching the ripples fade. Clearly, Emi's real plan was still hidden, and his escape had just become a lot more difficult. Nathan glanced up and spotted Koike, Emi leaning against a large tree, her eyes wide with disbelief. He ignored her stare and looked down at his side. Blood was seeping through his jacket. Though he'd deployed his water clone at the last moment to lessen the impact, he hadn't escaped unscathed. His Rasengan skill had just reached level 7. He hadn't gathered much chakra for that spinning sphere, but even a glancing touch was powerful enough to draw blood. Without pausing, Nathan sprang forward, mastering his flesh blade technique to close the gap in an instant. Clang, clang, clang. Steel rang against steel as Emi met him in a flurry of blows. This time, Nathan didn't rely on feints or fancy footwork. He simply moved with astonishing speed, darting around her defenses and unleashing a relentless barrage aimed at wearing down her resolve. Each strike bore the weight of his unwavering focus, and Emi felt the pressure mounting until her heart pounded with panic. She'd heard whispers of Nathan's prowess, but never imagined the rumors could understate how formidable he truly was. It wasn't until today, standing face to face with Nathan, that Emi truly grasped how wildly conservative the rumors about him had been. They hadn't been exaggerated, they'd fallen far short of the reality. With every measured step he took, her heart pounded. She'd never felt so outmatched. They traded blade clashes in a flurry of steel and sparks, but before long Emi could feel her endurance fraying. Nathan's pace never wavered. His swordplay was impossibly fluid, his reactions preternaturally fast. Just when it seemed she might be overwhelmed, Tomohiko Tanabe barreled onto the field, rushing in to rally to her side. Emi let out a relieved breath as Tanabe intercepted Nathan's next strike, giving her a moment to catch her footing. Nathan simply narrowed his eyes and launched himself at both opponents at once. Blessed with the unerring foresight of his Sharingan, a mastery of sword technique far beyond his years, and a physique that moved with uncanny power, he met their combined assault head-on. Blow by blow, he fought them almost effortlessly, his counterattacks growing sharper, more commanding as the seconds passed. Around the trio, a ring of Kirigakure Chunin had gathered. They hovered on the edge of the clearing, watching in stunned silence. Neither Emi nor Tanabe could muster an opening for their allies to intervene. Nathan's speed was simply too great. Power disparities like this left the onlookers frozen, helpless to do anything but witness his dominance unfold. Nathan counted the seconds slipping past, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then, in an instant, he froze. With a swift, almost theatrical twist, he reordered his strikes, redirecting the blade that had been aimed at Tomohiko Tanabe straight toward Emi Koike. Caught off guard by Nathan's sudden shift in rhythm, both opponents hesitated. Tanabe, however, recovered first. Recognizing the deviation, he thrust his sickle-shaped knee, ninja tool toward Nathan in a blur of steel. But Nathan had spent these past minutes studying their patterns. This was exactly the chance he'd been waiting for. He stepped lightly aside, letting the tool whistle past harmlessly. Emi Koike lacked Tanabe's agility. She was still nursing bruises from the earlier Rasengan attack, and her reflexes in close combat weren't as sharp. When Nathan's knife swung in her direction, she reacted a fraction too late. With arms trembling, she managed only to raise her kunai in defense. The two blades met with a thunderous clang, and a shockwave rippled through the air. Nathan pressed the advantage, stepping into Emi's guard before she could recover. His eyes narrowed. He'd forced them into mistakes, and now the real fight could begin. Emi Koike reeled under the impact, stumbling half a step backward. Seizing her momentary weakness, Nathan's eyes flashed, and he unleashed his snap sword technique. With a fluid pivot to Emi's right flank, he let the blade hum with concentrated wind chakra, forging an inch-long razor edge of air that gleamed in the light. In an instant, the air split with a sharp shick. Nathan's sword bit into Emi's shoulder, severing flesh and bone. Emi's kunai clattered to the ground as she cried out, dropping her weapon. Without a second's hesitation, Nathan snapped his wrist and brought his long blade around in a deadly arc, aimed at her neck. At that critical moment, Tomohiko Tanabe lunged forward, feet pounding the earth. He slid in front of Emi, meeting Nathan's strike head-on. With a resonant clang, the sickle-shaped ninja tool in Tomohiko's hand rose to intercept the blade, shattering the lethal slice into sparks of steel and chakra. Sparks flew as their blades met, the metal hissing in protest. Nathan steadied himself across from Tomohiko Tanabe, already summoning the power of his illusion. Sharingan. Sensing the shift, Tanabe forced Nathan's longsword aside, then spun away, putting 3 meters between them. Behind him, Emi Koike took the chance to scramble back as well. But the momentary safety was nothing more than an illusion. Nathan's body glowed with that familiar emerald light. He was about to unleash his instant sword technique when suddenly, mist-shrouded figures emerged from every side. Hidden Leaf Shinobi, masters of stealth, hurled kunai enchanted spells. Their attacks came too swiftly to dodge one by one. They even anticipated Nathan's path toward Tomohiko and Emi, intercepting him before he could close the gap. Nathan's brow furrowed. He couldn't afford to get bogged down in a skirmish with these ninjas, but they'd sealed off every exit. With a deep breath, he braced himself. The air around him crackled as chakra surged through his limbs. There would be no choice but to break through. He darted forward, blades whirling, each strike precise and explosive. Kunai splintered against his sword, ninjutsu fizzled against his chakra-enhanced defenses. Yet for every shadow he cut down, 2 more took its place. The mist thickened, swirling like vengeful ghosts. Nathan's eyes, now the brilliant red of the Sharingan, locked onto Tomohiko and Emi, who stood huddled together on the far edge of the clearing. He could see Tanabe's tension, Emi's fear, hear the distant clatter of enemy weapons closing in. Summoning every ounce of will, Nathan unleashed a burst of chakra so fierce it lit the fog from within. A shockwave blasted outward, scattering the attacking shinobi and carving a tunnel through the mist. Nathan sprinted out of the swirling chaos, leaving behind stunned opponents and trailing wisps of dissipating chakra. He skidded to a stop before Tomohiko and Emi, breathing hard but triumphant. "Are you both all right?" he gasped. Emi pressed a hand to her chest, nodding. Tomohiko's usual stoicism cracked into a brief, grateful smile. "Thanks to you," Emi managed. Nathan sheathed his sword, letting the lingering glow of the Sharingan fade. Around them, the mist shinobi regrouped at the forest's edge, eyeing their prey warily. But for now, the Ye path was clear. Together, the 3 of them turned and continued deeper into the night-shrouded woods, undaunted, united, and ready for whatever came next. Nathan's heart skipped a beat, a flicker of unease crawling up his spine. Shaking it off, he unleashed the Earth Escape hardening technique. A rocky armor encased him, and he surged forward, steel meeting flesh as he tore through the ranks of mist ninjas. Chaos exploded around him. Shouts rang in his ears. "He's here! Watch out! Get aside! He's unstoppable!" But Nathan didn't slow. He drew on the instant sword technique, each flourish of his blade a razor-sharp solution to the next threat. In that moment, he was a precise, calculating machine, every slash and thrust perfectly executed, every movement free of doubt. Then, above the roar of combat, a single, commanding shout cut through the din. "Retreat!" As if clutching at a lifeline, the mist ninjas scattered in all directions, vanishing into the mist from which they'd emerged. Nathan watched their backs, and made no move to give chase. The order had been issued, the enemy routed. For now, the fight was done. Chapter 497, Causes and Consequences. Footsteps, slow, heavy, echoed through the rubble as Ono Kamijiro dragged his shattered right leg forward. Gasping, he forced himself upright and peered toward the sound. Nathan advanced with deliberate calm, each step driving home the futility of resistance. Fear stabbed through Ono. He staggered backward and clenched a kunai in his trembling right hand, as if the blade could somehow shield him from what was coming. Nathan watched the feeble gesture with cool contempt. He had no patience for this desperate orphan. In the blink of an eye, he closed the distance and loomed over Ono. Before Ono could launch his final, reckless attack, their eyes met, and Nathan's Sharingan flared to life. He wove a genjutsu that seized Ono's mind in an instant. A precise kick sent the kunai skittering out of reach, clattering across the shattered floor. Within the illusion, Nathan probed Ono's memories like a master interrogator, pulling forth every scrap of information he needed. Then, as suddenly as it began, the illusion shattered. Nathan's brow furrowed as he absorbed the truths he had just drawn out. Nathan paused for a moment, then raised his hand to seal the jutsu and invoked the chakra absorption technique. In one breath, he drained the shinobi's chakra completely, and the man collapsed, lifeless. Without hesitation, Nathan moved on to another Kirigakure Chunin, ensnared him with his Genjutsu Sharingan, and began to sift through his memories. Kamijiro Ono wasn't the only abandoned child of the Hidden Mist. In the recent battle, Nathan had crippled or grievously wounded several Kirigakure shinobi. When Commander Tomohiko Tanabe ordered the retreat, only a handful were evacuated. The rest lay scattered across the field. Now, each of these fallen soldiers provided Nathan with both valuable intelligence and fresh chakra. Their memories overlapped. After all, they'd served on the same team, but that only confirmed the details Nathan had already gleaned. More importantly, their combined chakra reserves far exceeded what a single host could contain. To manage this surplus, Nathan formed multiple shadow clones. He stationed them as sentries around his location, then quietly practiced low-signature techniques, using them to burn off the excess energy without raising alarm. With his perimeter secure and reserves balanced, Nathan prepared for whatever lay ahead. Nathan sat quietly in the dim light, having just drawn the last vestiges of chakra from the surviving mist ninjas. He closed his eyes, reaching into their stolen memories like pages of an open book, then cataloged what he'd learned. At first, he assumed their arrival was nothing more than routine, a simple patrol or courier mission gone awry. But Ono Kamijiro's recollections shattered that notion. This encounter had been planned. According to Ono's memories, earlier that day he'd received a direct order. Shadow Tanabe Tomohiko and 4 other senior shinobi then lie in wait at a predetermined site. In fact, several Mist Village squads were dispatched with identical instructions, each to ambush different supporting teams approaching the frontline camp. In other words, the Mist Village had infiltrated vital positions around the Allied forces. Nathan allowed himself a small, wry smile. Despite the Mist Ninjas' careful coordination, they'd never discovered the exact campsite locations of Shisui Uchiha and himself. Their convergence had been pure chance, one that turned their attackers' plan on its head. Everything now fit the pattern Nathan had suspected. The Mist Village intended to sever reinforcements before they could rally, and only blind luck had thwarted them. He opened his eyes. The night was still, broken only by the soft rustle of wind through the pines. Somewhere beyond the ridge, more Mist operatives were surely gathering information, poised to strike. But Nathan felt no fear, only resolve. Now that he knew their scheme, he would ensure it ended here. One by one, he would unravel the Mist Village's web of spies, protect the Allied lines, and reveal the true architects behind this betrayal. The future of the frontline camp depended on it. Clearly, they weren't sent specifically to take out Shisui and me, otherwise they'd have deployed far more troops. Nathan surveyed the scattered bodies with a wry grin. Strength really is everything. He shook off any lingering concern and settled in to wait. Based on Ono Kamijiro's debrief, Nathan already knew the Kirigakure Brigade's overall capabilities and could easily calculate how many shinobi it took to handle someone like Shisui. Essentially the same number they'd need for Nathan himself. From everything he'd learned about Shisui's prowess, the fight might be a touch messier than Nathan's own battles, but it wouldn't pose any real danger. There was no need to intervene. True to his expectations, 10 minutes later Shisui strolled back into view. His breathing was calm, his stance unbowed, and there wasn't a scratch on him. The victory had been clean and effortless. Nathan stood a little awkwardly, his once pristine Konoha uniform now riddled with tears where he'd used earth release hardening to ward off the first strike. Luckily, none of the rips bled, and that small mercy made Uchiha Shisui exhale in relief. He turned to Nathan and asked, "Anything new you've uncovered?" Shisui phrased it as additional discoveries, because he, too, had mastered Genjutsu, Sharingan. At its fourth tier, that illusion technique could steer a target's perceptions into specific memories, almost like reading their mind. With Shisui's natural talent, his proficiency without any external aid easily surpassed level 4, enabling him to glean secrets from the Mist Ninja's thoughts. Nathan's Sharingan, however, was even more refined, capable of deeper, more precise intrusions. That was why Shisui looked to him now, eager to hear what further intelligence Nathan had managed to extract. Nathan didn't hesitate when Shisui pressed him for details. He laid out everything he knew and all the theories he'd pieced together. As Nathan spoke, Shisui's normally composed features grew tense. It didn't matter whether those Mist Ninjas were targeting them specifically. The very fact that they'd shown up here was alarming enough. The situation had just gotten a lot more dangerous. Sensing Shisui's concern, Nathan cut him off. "Enough talk. Let's move." With that, he dispelled his shadow clone technique, instantly absorbing every memory and scrap of combat experience the clones had gathered. Shisui spared the fading clone a brief glance, then offered a curt nod. Having just survived an ambush, the two of them pressed on toward the rendezvous point, each footstep careful, each sense honed for the slightest sign of pursuit. Although intelligence reports indicated that the Mist Ninja squad sent after them lacked the skills to kill outright, Nathan and his partner pressed on with every sense alert. Low-level operatives might be inexperienced, but they weren't harmless. Smoke bombs, hidden traps, or feigned retreats could all be used to deadly effect. With lives at stake, no precaution felt excessive. Fortunately, the journey proved uneventful. After an hour, winding through the dense forest, they finally broke free into open ground. Not far ahead, a Konoha patrol stepped into view. A quick ID check later, the Shinobi guards ushered them past the outer defenses and into the heart of the village's fortifications. They passed through several more checkpoints before arriving at their destination, the forward camp on the southern defense line. Stepping inside the bustling encampment, Nathan paused at the wooden palisade. From here, the distant clash of steel and the crackle of chakra floated on the breeze, proof that the battlefield beyond was anything but quiet. He took a deep breath, steeled himself, and prepared to join the fight. Chapter 498. Strange Nathan stepped into the hushed office at camp headquarters and found Captain Nara Kaimitsu waiting behind a low wooden desk. Their eyes met. This was only their second encounter. The first had been a brief exchange on the front lines when Nathan first arrived. Now, in this quiet room, that fleeting moment felt both distant and immediate. After a long, tense pause, Kaimitsu spoke. "I've learned you were ambushed on your way here." Nathan offered a curt nod, but said nothing more. He studied the captain's unreadable expression. He knew this couldn't be a random attack. Intelligence from Kirigakure village was too valuable to be dismissed. If their data had been compromised, someone had to investigate. Without answers, no one would trust fully in the village's protection, or dare turn their back on an ally. Kaimitsu's gaze flicked away for a heartbeat, then returned. He slid open the desk drawer and retrieved a sealed dossier bound in dark leather. With a deliberate motion, he placed it on the desk and pushed it toward Nathan. The village crest stamped on its flap caught the light. Nathan's fingers hovered over the folder's edge. Whatever lay inside would explain the ambush and set the course for every shinobi who relied on Kirigakure's trust. He took a steadying breath and broke the seal. Nathan paused before the documents laid out on the table, his hand hovering over the top folder. "What are these?" he asked. "Open them and see for yourself," Narakimitsu replied, lifting his chin in a silent instruction. Nathan didn't need another prompt. He flipped open the file and began to leaf through the pages. With every new report, his face darkened. Scores of leaks, some hardly more than whispers of stolen intelligence, others full-blown crises, were cataloged here. Each breach had inflicted varying degrees of damage, yet not a single case had been traced to its source. He recalled his past life, where even in a world of supernatural talents and advanced forensics, a determined investigator could follow a thread of clues from one minor slip to the heart of a conspiracy. The saboteur might cover their tracks, but mistakes always left a trace. Anomalies in access logs, distorted surveillance feeds, collateral chatter, clues that added up. And with Nara Keimitsu's razor-sharp mind on the hunt, at least one of these leaks should have been solved by now. Nathan closed the folder with a sharp snap. The sheer scale of unsolved breaches in so short a time, and the fact that they'd all gone cold, hit him like a blow. This wasn't just improbable. It was a crisis, and now it was up to him to find out why. Nathan frowned, his mind racing as he tried to make sense of the situation. No matter how hard he thought, the reason eluded him. Sensing his distress, Nara Kigwang tapped the table to jar him from his reverie. "You've seen the document," he reminded him. "This very plan to summon you at the last minute was always bound to leak like this, so—" He let the sentence hang, but Nathan understood perfectly. Nara was admitting, through action rather than words, that the breach was not deliberate, and, at the same time, extending an olive branch to restore their trust. It was a shrewd move. Though Nathan still worried about the camp's faltering intelligence network, the constant fear of a traitorous blow from within eased. The notion that one of their own could be behind this kind of leak felt almost impossible, especially given the dozen or more compromises he'd already encountered, not to mention all the information he'd never even seen. Even Danzo wouldn't dare shoulder the blame at this level. And with Nara Keimitsu's keen mind, he must have already weighed every possibility and conducted a thorough investigation. Yet the information continued to leak, proof, it seemed, that Danzo wasn't the culprit. If he had been, Keimitsu surely would have gone straight to Hokage Hiruzen Sarutobi and demanded Danzo's removal. After all, this was no trivial matter, but a crisis that could tip the balance on the front lines. Even Nara Keimitsu couldn't afford to look the other way. So who was responsible? Nathan felt a wave of frustration. As Keimitsu laid out his orders, his mind kept wandering, trying to pin down the shadowy source of the leaks. Stepping out of the office, he shook his head to clear his thoughts. There would be time for questions later. For now, there was work to be done. Without pause, Nathan sprinted toward the front. Rest was a luxury they no longer possessed. Keimitsu had already dispatched Uchiha Shisui, his report filed long before Nathan's, and sent him off to another sector. That quick deployment alone spoke volumes. The situation on the battlefield was dire. With resolve hardening in his chest, Nathan plunged into the conflict, determined to uncover the truth and turn the tide however he could. Nathan had braced himself for difficulties, but the moment he stepped onto the front line, his brow involuntarily furrowed. He'd assumed that fighting on home ground would ensure steady logistics. Even if the defense line was overstretched and a gap opened, supplies could be sent in without issue. Yet the reality was far worse. Supply convoys kept getting ambushed, and the stockpiles never reached the ninja laboring at the front. As a result, Konoha's forces were forced to hold their positions on dwindling rations and failing equipment. The situation had deteriorated sharply over the past 2 days. Enemy forces had struck unexpectedly, shifting the front line and throwing all resupply plans into chaos. Nathan replayed in his mind the report he'd just read, several deliberate leaks pointing to insider sabotage along the supply routes. A cold anger settled in his chest. "Utterly dishonorable," he muttered through clenched teeth. He sighed, forcing the resentment aside. There was no time to linger on grievances. Ahead of him stood the team he was to command and fight with. Gathering his composure, Nathan moved forward to introduce himself. In the days to come, he and these shinobi would be shoulder to shoulder in the struggle for Konoha's survival. Nathan hadn't come to Konoha expecting anyone to roll out the red carpet for him, but he still needed to get a sense of how these shinobi would treat him. To his surprise, they welcomed him with open arms, no hesitation, no whispered complaints. Though many didn't yet know him by name, the rumors of Ghost Blade Nathan had begun to circulate. Everyone agreed that adding a ninja of his caliber to their ranks could only strengthen the village. Even those few who normally looked on the Uchiha with suspicion kept their doubts to themselves. In no time at all, Nathan was fully integrated into their unit. Time marched on, and in the blink of an eye, 3 days had passed. Nathan had arrived on the battlefield 3 days ago. That very night, the first clash broke out. Since then, he'd been thrust into over a dozen engagements, some mere skirmishes, others full-scale battles. The Kirigakure shinobi they faced here were fiercer and more numerous than any foes he'd met back in Feiyu Town. On his first day, with nothing but raw power and precision, he cut down 2 enemy jonin. Word spread fast, though, and by the next dawn, even more high-ranking mist ninja had been dispatched to hunt him, each one a daunting adversary in their own right. If Nathan had unleashed his full power, he could have severely crippled them, but the situation was too sensitive for that. He didn't want to draw undue attention, so he deliberately held back. Once he'd baited enough of the Kirigakure jonin into focusing on him, the clash settled into a tense stalemate. The command center approved of his restraint. In fact, Nara Chiguang had orchestrated it. What they needed more than anything right now was time. So not only was Nathan stalling the enemy, but every Konoha jonin who'd reinforced their lines was doing the same, delaying Kirigakure's advance at every opportunity. Now all they had to do was wait for the village's long-prepared strategy to kick in. When it did, the Kirigakure jonin would be forced to withdraw completely, and Nathan's diversion wouldn't have been in vain. Fortunately, the decisive moment was approaching faster than anyone had feared. Chapter 499, Awakening. That evening, Nathan and his squad had just driven back the latest wave of Mist Ninja attackers when word arrived that Nara Kiyoshi had dispatched a messenger with new orders. Still streaked with blood, Nathan made his way to the rear command post and slipped into a small chamber where a Konoha Chunin waited. Without ceremony, he asked, "What does the captain want?" The Chunin wasted no time. He stepped forward and handed Nathan a sealed warrant. Nathan examined every crease and stamp, then used his own seal to break the captain's before peeling open the envelope. Inside was a single sheet covered in numbers and strange symbols, the latest ciphered message from Kiyoshi. Nathan tucked the warrant away and studied the encoded page. Translating it would take work, but Kiyoshi had little choice. An elusive spy had been siphoning classified information for days, forcing the captain to guard every transmission with unbreakable codes. Now Nathan had to decode it himself to learn exactly what lay ahead. Nathan decoded the secret message almost before the ink had dried. His expression never flickered. After a brief pause, he tucked the burnt orange scroll away and addressed the Konoha Chunin standing before him. "I've received the orders. You may return to report." "Yes, Jonin Nathan," the Chunin replied without hesitation. Bowing sharply, he stepped out of the makeshift wooden hut and vanished down the narrow path. Nathan closed his eyes and reached out with his chakra, ensuring no one lingered within earshot. Satisfied that the messenger had truly departed, he retrieved the parchment once more. In his mind's eye, the once encrypted code rearranged itself into clear words. "This morning, the operation begins on schedule." Bang! A tiny orb of flame flickered to life in Nathan's palm. With a simple motion, it ignited the scroll, turning the paper to ash in an instant. Nathan exhaled quietly, scattering the remnants to the breeze. Only then did a solemn determination settle over his features. He had known little more than the broad outline of the plan. Konoha's elite forces would launch a decisive strike today, using their superior combat prowess to turn the tide. Now that the hour had come, there was no turning back. Konoha has been stretched thin by simultaneous conflicts on multiple fronts, so this operation remained on hold until today. At last, every element is in place. Over the past 3 days, Nathan has learned the full details of the plan, which, in its simplicity, is brutally efficient. Marshal all of Konoha's elite forces and carry out a decapitation strike against the Hidden Mist village. The target isn't just the village's commander, but every high-level ninja under his command. Shikaku Nara's objective is to shatter the Mist village's chain of command in one swift blow. Deprived of their senior leadership, the rank-and-file shinobi will be unable to mount any coherent defense. Sure, the Hidden Mist will eventually attempt to rebuild its leadership and retaliate, but that reorganization will take time. By then, The decisive battle between Konoha and the Sand Village should have already concluded. Barring any unexpected complications, Konoha will emerge victorious. Once reinforcements are free to shift from the sand front, any threat posed by the hidden mist will be little more than a footnote. Everything the Konoha elders had done so far was simply to buy time. They deliberately kept the operation as straightforward as possible. Fewer moving parts meant fewer chances for something to go wrong, especially with an enemy spy still at large. Clarity and simplicity were the best guarantees of secrecy. That was why, to this day, Narration had revealed the exact timing only to a handful of his most trusted shinobi. Nathan could easily imagine that the elite strike team the other villages had dispatched for the decapitation mission still hadn't reached camp. Clearly, Narration had thrown everything he had into preventing disaster. Shaking his head to clear away the heavy thoughts, Nathan muttered, "I wonder if Namikaze Minato will come this time. Such a golden opportunity to bolster his reputation. Surely Sarutobi Hiruzen wouldn't let Minato miss it." With that thought, Nathan slipped out of the wooden hut and into the fresh morning air. Nathan halted mid-stride, his body stiffening as the name slipped from his lips. "Minato Namikaze?" In that instant, it was as if a meteor had streaked through his thoughts, banishing all confusion and bringing a flood of realizations. He blinked, struggling to find his voice, then shook his head as though to clear it. After a brief pause, he brought a hand to the seal on his forehead. With deliberate concentration, Nathan unraveled the guardian seal, channeling chakra into the emblem at his brow. When he opened his eyes, their iridescent white glow pierced through the Konoha headband and the walls of the surrounding houses. In an instant, his vision expanded to encompass every movement and detail within a 1-kilometer radius. Yet Nathan paid little heed to the bustling village around him. Instead, his gaze dropped to the earth beneath his feet. He mentally swept through the soil, roots, stones, void, and confirmed there was nothing concealed underground. Satisfied, he guided chakra to reseal his eyes, returning them to their natural hue. As his vision normalized, Nathan's thoughts returned to the startling revelation that had just surfaced. Minato Namikaze's 3 disciples. The implications raced through his mind, weaving new questions and possibilities he could not yet unravel. More than 2 months ago, when Nathan first heard that Shwanghai Town had fallen, he immediately suspected Iwagakure would seize the opening and strike into the Land of Fire. He thought back to the battle at Kanabi Bridge and to Obito's apparent death, and realized his fears were confirmed. In the aftermath of that clash, word arrived of Obito's selfless sacrifice. Though Nathan still remembered Uchiha Tiehuo's whispered warning, Kakashi had transplanted an Uchiha Sharingan, and someone would surely come to reclaim it. By now, Obito must be nearly fully healed from his wounds, and with the Third Shinobi War winding down, the moment is ripe for Madara Uchiha to deliver his decisive blow. Madara's plan, Nathan reasoned, is to shatter Obito's world by using Nohara Rin, driving him to such despair that he unlocks the Mangekyo Sharingan. But kidnapping Rin under the watchful eye of Minato Namikaze is virtually impossible. The only way to get at her, Nathan concluded, is to eliminate Minato first. And if Madara discovers that Konoha is plotting to decapitate the Uchiha leadership at this critical juncture, will he intervene directly? Nathan saw only one answer, almost certainly, yes. When you devise your own plan, no matter how meticulous you are, you'll always leave behind telltale traces. But if you simply ride the current of events, you can remain virtually invisible. That's why White Zetsu's disguise technique is the perfect tool, a flawless transformation skill in the ninja world that ordinary detection methods can't penetrate. By slipping in disguised Zetsu clones among unsuspecting shinobi, he can gather any intelligence he needs. Nathan realized that this was exactly how Kirigakure village must have obtained its information. Uchiha Madara had captured Nohara Rin and sealed the 3 tails within her, then deployed the Kirigakure Ambu to relay orders and intelligence. Without a plausible channel for those messages, the whole scenario would collapse into a joke. But now, with every piece in place, the hidden truth became clear. Determined to confirm his suspicions, Nathan activated his Byakugan and swept his vision across the landscape, especially below ground, seeking any sign of White Zetsu lurking in the shadows. Nathan couldn't forget that. In addition to the disguise technique, Baijue also wielded the mayfly technique, granting him blistering speed and the power to mask his chakra signature. That knowledge forced Nathan to remain on high alert. Thankfully, it didn't look like he was the target this time. Relief washed over him, coupled with a quiet gratitude that he had never revealed his Mangekyo Sharingan. Otherwise, Uchiha Madara would have singled him out in an instant. The setup he'd just escaped was clearly the work of a seasoned veteran, a shinobi old hand whose schemes were far from amateurish. Had Madara been the one behind it, Nathan would have been in serious trouble. More than anything, the incident served as a stark reminder. Never underestimate the old guard of the ninja world, no matter how much of an intellectual edge you think you have. Memories from a past life might illuminate a few corners of this world, but beyond that light lie hidden currents and concealed secrets, ones you won't detect simply by standing in the center of the storm. Chapter 500, Preparations by All Factions. Late into the night, deep beneath the ninja world, an eerie stillness reigned in a hidden subterranean chamber. In its center sat Uchiha Madara, hunched before a colossal husk, what remained of the 10 tails, frozen like a grim statue. His once dark hair had turned iron gray, his skin hung in loose sheets, and deep wrinkles carved his face. Every inch of him spoke of decay and impending death. Yet Madara lived on, sustained by the monstrous corpse behind him. Thick, black conduits snaked from the 10 tails' withered form into Madara's back, pumping raw life force into his failing body. Each slow, labored breath he took was a testament to that unholy fusion, a desperate measure keeping him tethered to existence long past nature's limit. The only sound in the chamber was Madara's ragged breathing, punctuating a suffocating silence. Time itself seemed to hold its breath. Then, as if drawn by some unseen summons, a black shape slipped through the shadows and closed the distance to Madara's side. Under the dim glow of chakra-infused torches, the newcomer paused. Madara's empty gaze fixed upon the figure, his chest rising and falling in anticipation. Whatever news or command this messenger brought would set dozens of hidden preparations into motion and signal the next move in the coming war. Black Zetsu was nothing more than the materialized will of Kaguya Otsutsuki, her most devoted offspring. Eons ago, in his quest to rescue her, he wove a web of deception around Uchiha Madara, convincing the great shinobi that he was Madara's own creation. From that moment on, he slipped into Madara's inner circle as a trusted aide, carrying out every order in service of a hidden agenda. Now, as Black Zetsu's presence made itself known, Madara opened his eyes. Though age had claimed much of his strength, an indomitable aura still clung to him, the quiet confidence of a top-tier warrior. His gaze settled on the crimson swirl of the 3 Magatama Sharingan in his irises as Zetsu's voice echoed in the dim chamber. "The operation has commenced. Shall we move forward?" Madara paused, his clouded eyes flaring with a spark of youthful intensity that belied his years. "It's already begun?" he asked, every word tinged with anticipation. Then Madara's voice rang out, firm and unyielding. "Begin the operation at once." "Yes, master," Black Zetsu replied, his tone laced with hidden meaning. In the next instant, his form sank into the earth and vanished. Madara didn't notice the subtle implication in those words. As soon as Black Zetsu disappeared, he shifted his gaze to a nearby wall, his Sharingan flaring to life as if it could see through solid stone. Beyond it, he spotted Obito pacing impatiently, grumbling to White Zetsu about wanting to return to Konohagakure as soon as possible. "Konoha," he muttered under his breath, lips curling in a dangerous smile. A cold light ignited in Madara's eyes. Crack! Without even realizing it, he crushed the railing beside him in his grip. Taking a slow, steadying breath, he murmured, "The time is almost upon us. Hashirama, I will prove once and for all who was right." With that, he closed his eyes and slipped into deep meditation, awaiting the fateful moment. At the same time, well behind the front lines stood a modest wooden house, its walls weathered by wind and rain. Inside, seated cross-legged on the floor, was Nathan. The young man's dark hair fell into his eyes as he stared at a single flickering candle. Around him lay scrolls, charts, and ancient tomes, evidence of a mind racing to uncover hidden truths. Despite the quiet, tension buzzed in the air, for outside, the gears of a battle far greater than any single shinobi's skill were already turning. Nathan drew a steadying breath and rose to his feet. Whatever lay ahead, he was determined to face it head on. Nathan paused his training with the reflection heart technique and the palm immortal technique. Glancing at the lantern clock on the wall, he flicked his hand and released the shadow clone technique, E. With a sudden crackle, every clone, both inside and outside the courtyard, dissolved into shimmering orbs of chakra. Each orb carried its hour's worth of experience and memory, then merged back into Nathan's body in an instant. He closed his eyes, centering himself and carefully assimilating the flood of sensations and insights. 15 minutes later, Nathan opened his eyes. The techniques he'd practiced through his shadow clones had fully integrated into his skill set. His mastery of the reflection heart technique and the palm immortal technique had leapt forward, their power now woven seamlessly into his own. With a single thought, Nathan summoned his status panel. In an instant, a pale blue screen hovered before him, its text glowing softly in the dim training hall. Name, Nathan Uchiha. Age 12 physique, 19 spirit 20. Chakra 85,564, none 20,948. Bloodline, Sharingan. Mankyo 14,416 50,000, the 15,088 50,000. Byakugan unawakened 15,100, a 1600. Skills, Chakra refining, level 5, 2,886 5,000, 2,998 per thousand. Wind style, spiral shuriken, 7, 8,220,000. Wind style, wind wings, 5, 2,350 5,000, 3,995 5,000. Wind style, fierce wind palm, 2, 310 500. Fire style, great dragon fire technique, lore 5, 405,000, 805 5,000. Fire style, unburned scorch technique, level 3, 725,000. Level 4, 1,125 2,000. Water style, great shark bullet technique, level 6, 1,500 H 10,000, 4,204 10,000. Water style, water wave, left 3, 61,000. Water style, water column, level 2, 400 or 500. Earth style, hardening technique, level 6, 200 10,000, 2,200 or 10,000. Earth style, earth flow wall, level 1, 21,200, level 4, 750s, 2,000. Shadow clone technique, level 5, 3,100, 5,000, 4,190, 5,000. Chakra absorption technique, level 6, 3,500 at 10,000, 4,400, 10,000. Rasengan, level 7, 12,120, 20,000, 14,000, 10, 20,000. Palm immortal technique, 8, 37,400, 50,000, 40,200, 50,000. Chakra scalpel, level 6, 8,500, 10,000, 9,200, 10,000. Microscopic extraction technique, 2,700 per 10,000, 3,100, 10,000. Heart reflecting technique, level 8, 18,371, 50,000, 19,715 and 50,000. Chakra control, 6, 750, 10,000, 1,000, 10,000. Guardian seal, lev. 4, and half turn, lev 5, 10 of. Sealing array, level 2, 240, 3, perfect skills. Heart reflecting technique, heart reflecting technique. Earth style, earth spear, earth 5, Nathan blinked as he reviewed the screen. Every chakra-based skill, elemental jutsu, and bloodline ability had surged forward. In just 1 week's time, he'd achieved remarkable growth, proof that his relentless training was paying off. Nathan reviewed his recent breakthroughs with a satisfied nod. First, he had perfected Tuninjutsu, the mind-reflecting technique, and earth style, earth spear, bringing each to a flawless level 5. The mind-reflecting technique now let him link minds with anyone within 20 kilometers. It wasn't quite on par with Yamanaka Inoichi's wartime memory transference, amplified by his perception barrier during the Fourth Shinobi World War, but it more than met Nathan's needs. Whenever he deployed a shadow clone as a relay, that range stretched beyond 100 kilometers, offering near-limitless communication across the field. The Earth Spear, too, had grown immeasurably stronger. With its newfound perfection, every successive use of the jutsu unleashed far greater destructive force. Even more importantly, mastering it so completely had pushed Nathan to a critical threshold in his earth-nature chakra. He was now ready to begin developing his fifth elemental affinity, but with war looming, there simply wasn't time to focus on it. He'd have to shelve that ambition for the moment. On top of these achievements, over the past week, Nathan had also diverted a portion of the chakra he'd harvested from enemy forces to elevate his guardian seal to level 5. That enhancement would prove invaluable in the battles to come. With his arsenal of skills now honed to their limits, Nathan felt more confident than ever. He could hold the line when the war finally broke. Now that the sealing technique has undergone its final transformation, Nathan feels certain that not even a Shadow-class Shinobi could detect the slightest abnormality when he conceals his Byakugan. This refinement is crucial for the decapitation mission he's planning in the village, an operation he fully expects will pit him against dozens of elite ninja from both sides. Thanks to the level 5 Guardian Seal, he can move forward without fear of betraying any weakness. Over the past week, while clashing with the Mist Village operatives, Nathan has also used his Sharingan to copy 3 ninjutsu, Wind Style, Fierce Wind Palm, and 2 Water Style techniques, Water Wave Technique and Water Pillar Formation. Although Fierce Wind Palm is a relatively basic wind jutsu, it can be applied to projectiles to dramatically boost their velocity, offering a useful edge in ranged combat. The Water Style techniques, by contrast, are genuinely powerful. Water Wave Technique is a standard C-rank jutsu, nothing flashy on its own, but in skilled hands it can sweep away multiple opponents at once. Meanwhile, Water Pillar Formation can trap or pin foes in a towering column of water, making it one of the most effective crowd control spells in Nathan's arsenal. Together with his masks and seals, these copied jutsu ensure he's more than ready for the trials ahead. Nathan examined the scroll in his hands and shook his head with a wry smile. This jutsu may be rated B rank and notoriously difficult stuff, he mused, but at full power it can even snuff out Madara Uchiha's Fire Style, Great Fire Extinguishing Technique. A formidable ninjutsu to be sure, yet entirely redundant for me. He'd already mastered the superior Water Style, Giant Shark Bullet Technique. That high-level water release not only replicates everything the Water Style, Water Formation Pillar can do, it actually surpasses it by drawing in ambient chakra to amplify its power. In practical terms, there was no strategic advantage in learning the B-rank water jutsu. So why bother copying it at all? Nathan shrugged. On the battlefield, you can't predict every outcome, he reminded himself. Sometimes you just have to prepare for every contingency. Besides, now that the jutsu was in his repertoire, he saw no reason to discard it. Having a broad arsenal of techniques, especially when your chakra proficiency panel lets you allocate your energy precisely, was never a disadvantage. As long as he distributed his chakra wisely, picking up an extra skill here and there wouldn't hamper the advancement of his core abilities. Nathan was determined to become a hexagonal warrior, so he knew it was essential to master as many new skills as possible.